You arrive at the frontier town just as the evening light turns the entire prairie gold. Dust drifts across the road in soft clouds behind the stagecoach wheels, hanging in the air like smoke from a distant fire. The horses breathe heavily. Leather straps creak somewhere nearby. A loose shutter taps against a wooden wall with a slow and sleepy rhythm that almost sounds like a clock. The settlement ahead barely looks real at first. A row of weathered buildings stands beneath the enormous western sky, each one leaning slightly, as though exhausted from years of wind and heat. Faded signs swing above storefronts. A barber pole turns lazily. The smell of horse sweat mixes with coal smoke, whiskey, and something frying in old grease. Somewhere farther down the street, a piano struggles through a tune that might once have sounded cheerful. You step down from the coach carefully, boots sinking slightly into the dirt of Main Street, and every eye turns toward you. Not dramatically, not all at once. Frontier towns are usually too tired for dramatic gestures, but people notice. A ranch hand carrying feed pauses beside a wagon. Two women standing near a mercantile glance quietly in your direction. A child with dusty cheeks stares openly before his mother pulls him along by the hand. They already know who you are, the new sheriff. It sounds impressive back east, in newspapers and dime novels. Sheriffs stride through gunsmoke with iron nerves and perfectly clean hats. Reality feels smaller somehow. Your coat is wrinkled from travel. Your shoulders ache from sitting upright inside the rattling coach for days. You smell faintly of dust and stale coffee. Not exactly legendary. Still, the silver badge in your pocket feels strangely heavy. The stagecoach driver climbs down beside you with a grunt and stretches his back until several joints crack loudly. "Well," he mutters, staring at the town, "either they need you badly or they've run out of volunteers." Then he spits into the dirt with remarkable accuracy. That is the first official frontier welcome you receive. You almost laugh. Instead, you pick up your small travel bag and look around slowly, letting the strange new world settle over you. The town exists in a curious balance between ambition and collapse. Fresh lumber sits beside buildings already rotting from weather. Some storefronts appear hopeful and newly painted. Others look abandoned, except for drifting dust gathering against their doors. The American frontier in the 1880s is filled with places exactly like this. Towns appear almost overnight beside cattle trails, mining camps, or railroad surveys. Some become cities. Others disappear so completely that within a generation, even their names vanish from maps. Historians still debate how many true frontier towns existed during these decades because settlements changed constantly. Some communities lasted only months before drought, violence, or economic failure erased them. One traveler described Western towns as temporary arguments against the wilderness. Standing here now, you understand what he meant. A gust of warm wind moves through the street, carrying piano music toward you again. This time you can hear laughter, too. Loud laughter, the kind produced by whiskey and exhaustion. The saloon doors swing open farther down the road. Yellow lamplight spills outward. You can already imagine the stories waiting inside. Gunfighters, drifters, cowboys with sunburned faces and bad tempers. Men playing cards beneath tobacco smoke while revolvers rest beside whiskey glasses. The Old West has become famous for such images, though the truth is usually quieter and sadder than the legends suggest. Most frontier sheriffs spend far more time dealing with drunkenness, stolen horses, and freezing prisoners than dramatic shootouts. Still, the danger is real enough. You feel it in the way people watch each other here. Nobody fully relaxes. Near the center of town stands a narrow wooden building with iron bars visible through its front window. The jailhouse. Beside it hangs another sign painted with fading black letters. Sheriff's Office. Your office now. Strange thought. A short man wearing suspenders approaches you cautiously from the boardwalk. His gray mustache twitches every few seconds as though reacting to invisible arguments. "You the new lawman?" he asks. You nod once. He studies you carefully. Frontier people study everything carefully. Out here, poor judgment can become fatal surprisingly fast. Finally, he extends a hand. Name's Walter Briggs, town council. His handshake feels dry and bony. "You got here quicker than expected," he says. That usually means the coach didn't break an axle or get robbed. You are not entirely sure whether he is joking. Before you can answer, he lowers his voice slightly. "Town's had some trouble lately." "Of course it has." Frontier towns always say this in the exact same tone, as though trouble might refer equally to murder, cattle theft, or somebody vomiting through a barber shop window after payday. "What kind of trouble, you ask?" Walter glances toward the saloon. "That kind mostly." Again, not especially reassuring. The sky above town deepens slowly from gold into violet. Lamps begin glowing behind windows one by one. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks twice before falling silent. You suddenly realize how far you are from everything familiar. Back east, nights feel crowded somehow. Even darkness carries the sense of nearby civilization. Out here, the land feels endless. The prairie stretches beyond town like an ocean, empty, rolling, vast enough to swallow people completely. You understand why frontier settlers often describe loneliness before they describe danger. Walter gestures toward the sheriff's office. "You can settle in later," he says. "Probably best folks see you walking around first. A performance already." You straighten slightly and begin following him down the dusty street, while townspeople continue watching from porches and storefronts. Boots scrape wood planks softly. Somewhere above, a lantern chain rattles in the wind. You notice everything. A cowboy sleeping beside a water trough with his hat over his face. A woman carrying laundry beneath her arm while keeping one cautious eye on the saloon. Two gamblers arguing quietly outside a hotel. A preacher hammering notices beside the church door despite fading light. Life here feels raw and unfinished, and now somehow, impossibly, you belong to it. As you approach the sheriff's office, Walter glances sideways at you again. "You know how to use a revolver, I assume." You pause briefly, then answer honestly. "Enough to worry about it." To your surprise, that answer seems to satisfy him. Because on the frontier, the men who brag loudest about guns often end up buried fastest. The piano music drifts through the cooling evening air once more, as darkness settles gently over the town you are supposed to protect. And somewhere far beyond the last buildings, coyotes begin to howl. Morning arrives slowly over the frontier town. At first the streets remain quiet, except for wind brushing dust against wooden porches. The sky glows pale silver behind distant hills, and frost-colored light stretches carefully across the prairie. Somewhere nearby, A rooster attempts its duty with more enthusiasm than talent. The sound cracks awkwardly in the cold air. You wake inside the sheriff's office on a narrow cot that feels approximately as comfortable as a wagon axle. The room smells faintly of old tobacco, lamp oil, damp wool, and pine boards heated by years of summer sun. Beside the cot sits your travel bag, untouched except for a layer of fresh dust that somehow appeared overnight. Dust arrives everywhere in frontier towns. It slips beneath doors, gathers inside boots, settles into coffee cups, and occasionally seems to enter philosophical debates without invitation. You sit up slowly, rubbing sleep from your eyes. The badge rests on the desk nearby, even in weak morning light. The silver star catches your attention immediately. A sheriff's badge in the Old West carries strange meaning. Some lawmen earn respect through years of difficult work. Others receive badges because nobody else wants the job badly enough. Certain frontier sheriffs become legends. Others disappear after a week, usually owing gambling debts or fleeing armed citizens. There are historical records of entire towns replacing sheriffs 3 or 4 times within a single year. Frontier justice moves quickly, sometimes too quickly. You wash your face using water from a metal basin, so cold it nearly stops your breathing. Then comes the badge. You pin it carefully onto your vest. The tiny metallic click sounds louder than expected. For a brief moment, you simply stare at your reflection in the cracked mirror hanging beside the wall. You do not look especially heroic. Your eyes appear tired already. Your coat remains wrinkled from travel. One side of your collar refuses cooperation entirely. Yet somehow the badge changes everything anyway. It creates authority where none existed before, or perhaps only the illusion of authority. On the frontier, those two things often become dangerously similar. Outside, the town begins waking fully. You hear wagon wheels groaning across dirt roads. Horses snort beside hitching posts. A blacksmith starts hammering iron somewhere nearby, each sharp clang echoing through the chilly air like a church bell. The smell of wood smoke drifts through the open window, and beneath all of it rests a strange tension. The town watches you now, not openly perhaps, but constantly. You step outside onto the boardwalk and immediately feel the cold morning wind pushing against your coat. The street looks completely different in daylight, less mysterious, more exhausted. Buildings reveal their flaws under the rising sun. Paint peels from walls, windows crack at the corners, roof lines sag slightly beneath years of storms and neglect. Frontier towns often present themselves proudly to travelers while quietly falling apart underneath. A few townspeople nod politely as you pass. Others pretend not to notice you at all. That itself tells you something. People in Western settlements learn caution early. A sheriff might protect them from violence or cause new violence simply by arriving. Many frontier communities remain deeply suspicious of authority, especially after experiences with corrupt lawmen, cattle barons, railroad agents, or hired guns. The truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes the badge belongs to the wrong man. You stop outside the general store, where an elderly woman sweeps dust from the porch with slow, determined strokes. The dust immediately blows back again. An unwinnable war. She eyes you briefly. You armed, she asks, without greeting. Interesting first question. Yes, ma'am. Good. Then she resumes sweeping as though discussing weather. You continue walking. Near the stable, Several cowboys stand beside their horses, drinking coffee from tin cups. Their faces appear weathered beyond their years, burned dark by prairie sun and endless wind. One man cannot be older than 20, yet already looks permanently tired. Cowboy life in the 1880s is far harsher than later movies suggest. Most cowboys earn low wages, sleep outdoors in terrible weather, and spend exhausting days driving cattle across enormous distances. By the time they reach towns like this, they are sore, lonely, underpaid, and desperate for entertainment, which explains why sheriffs become very familiar with saloon fights. One cowboy lifts his cup slightly toward you. "Mornin', Sheriff." You nod back. Another man studies your revolver. "Hope you shoot straighter than the last fellow." You pause. "What happened to him?" The cowboy shrugs. "Depends who tells it." That answer hangs in the air a moment longer than comfortable. Historical records from frontier towns often contain wildly contradictory accounts of shootings and law enforcement incidents. Newspapers exaggerated constantly. Witnesses lied. Drunk men remembered events creatively. Even respected lawmen sometimes altered reports to protect themselves or political allies. The Old West runs partly on myth even while it is happening. You reach the jailhouse and step inside. Cold iron bars divide the narrow room. A desk sits beside the wall covered in old paperwork, empty whiskey bottles, and a deck of cards missing several queens. The previous sheriff clearly possessed complicated organizational standards. Inside one cell, a man snores loudly beneath a filthy blanket. Walter Briggs appears from the back room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Well," he says, handing one toward you, "still alive. Encouraging start." That puts you ahead of some. He sips carefully before lowering his voice. "Prisoner's name is Eli Turner. Drunk and disorderly. Broke 3 windows at the saloon." You glance toward the sleeping figure. "He dangerous." Walter considers this thoughtfully. "To windows, maybe. Then comes your first official sheriff duty. Paperwork. Not gunfights. Not dramatic standoffs beneath blazing western skies. Paperwork. You spend nearly an hour reading arrest reports written in handwriting that resembles wounded spiders crawling through mud. Most offenses involve public drunkenness, fighting, gambling disputes, or stolen livestock. One man apparently attempted to marry a mule while intoxicated. Scholars still argue how common heavy drinking truly was in frontier towns because surviving accounts often exaggerate vice dramatically. But saloons undeniably formed the social center of many Western communities. People gathered there for warmth, companionship, news, gambling, business negotiations, and temporary escape from loneliness. Loneliness remains the hidden disease of the frontier. Even now, sitting inside the little sheriff's office while morning light spills across dusty floors, you can feel it lingering quietly in the corners. Walter suddenly glances toward the window. "Here comes trouble." You follow his gaze. 3 riders approach slowly through the street, coats flapping behind them in the prairie wind. Their horses move with the lazy confidence of men accustomed to carrying weapons openly. The townspeople notice too. Conversations soften. Movements slow slightly. Nobody panics, but everybody watches. One rider tips his hat toward the jailhouse with a faint smile that somehow feels less friendly than intended. And you realize your first full day as sheriff may become interesting sooner than expected. The 3 riders stop directly outside the jailhouse. For a few seconds, nobody moves. Their horses shift restlessly beneath them, leather saddles creaking softly in the morning air. Dust curls around the animals' legs like drifting smoke. One horse flicks its tail impatiently, while another lowers its head toward a muddy water trough beside the boardwalk. The riders themselves appear calm, too calm. You notice details automatically now. The worn revolver grips, sun-faded coats, spurs scratched from years in the saddle. One man carries a rifle in a saddle scabbard polished smooth by constant use. Another has silver stitching along his vest, slightly too elegant for ordinary ranch work. Frontier people often reveal themselves through tiny details. Walter Briggs mutters beside you. Dalton Brothers, your stomach tightens slightly. Not the famous Daltons from later outlaw stories. Frontier towns contain endless families named Dalton, Carter, Reed, or Miller. But these particular brothers apparently carry enough reputation to lower the volume of an entire street simply by arriving. The tallest rider removes his hat politely. "Morning, Sheriff." "Interesting." His voice sounds courteous, almost friendly. You step onto the boardwalk outside the jailhouse. The wooden planks creak beneath your boots. "Morning." The rider studies you carefully. His face is narrow and deeply lined from weather, though he cannot be more than 40. He has pale eyes that never fully settle in one place. "Heard we got ourselves new law," he says. "Looks that way." A faint smile touches his mouth. The other brothers remain silent behind him, watching everything. You already understand an important frontier truth. Silence often carries more danger than shouting. The tall rider extends one hand lazily. "Frank Dalton." You shake carefully. His palm feels rough as old rope. "No trouble here," Frank says. "Just passing through." Another fascinating frontier phrase. People claiming they are just passing through usually remain memorable afterward. Walter stays near the jailhouse door, saying nothing. Smart choice. Men like Frank Dalton often test new sheriffs slowly, searching for weakness, arrogance, or fear. You decide against offering any of those. "Then enjoy your visit," you say evenly. Frank glances toward the saloon. "Oh, I expect we will." One brother finally speaks from horseback. "Assuming the whiskey hasn't killed everybody yet." That earns quiet laughter from nearby cowboys. Tension eases slightly. Not completely, but enough. Frank tips his hat once more before nudging his horse forward. The three riders continue down Main Street, beneath the curious eyes of townspeople pretending not to stare openly. You watch until they disappear beside the saloon. Only then does Walter exhale heavily. Could have gone worse. Could have gone better, too. Walter nods reluctantly. "Fair point." He lowers his voice. "Frank Dalton runs cattle south of here, pays some folks well, threatens others, depends on the season. And the law." Walter gives a tiny shrug. "The frontier's complicated. That might become the official slogan of the American West." You spend the next hour learning the jailhouse properly. There is not much to learn. One office, 2 cells, a small storage room containing blankets that smell like trapped winters, a rifle rack beside the wall, a pot-bellied stove, and an impressive number of mice who apparently consider themselves legal residents. The drunk prisoner finally wakes near midday. Eli Turner emerges from beneath his blanket with the expression of a man personally betrayed by whiskey. "Oh, Lord," he groans. "You broke 3 saloon windows. You inform him." Eli squints toward you through the bars. "You sure?" "Yes." He thinks about this seriously. Then probably deserved it. Frontier prisoners often display surprising honesty after severe hangovers. You unlock the cell briefly to hand him water. He drinks greedily, then wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. "You the new sheriff? That obvious." "Well," Eli says, glancing around the office, "you still look disappointed." You cannot help smiling slightly. Eli notices. "There you go," he says. "That's important." "What is?" "Smilin' sometimes." Last sheriff stopped smiling entirely. Month later he shot a poker table. A poker table. Thought the cards were mocking him. Historical frontier records contain endless stories like this. Isolation, exhaustion, violence, heat, alcohol, and loneliness wear people down slowly. Mental strain among Western lawmen rarely appears in heroic legends. Yet many sheriffs worked under relentless pressure with little support. Some cracked quietly, others cracked loudly. Outside, the town grows busier as afternoon sunlight spreads across the street. Wagons arrive carrying supplies. Ranch hands move cattle through nearby alleys. Children chase one another past storefronts despite repeated warnings from exhausted mothers. A boy pauses outside the jailhouse window, staring directly at you. "How many men you killed?" he asks. Walter nearly chokes on coffee. "None." You answer carefully. The child looks genuinely disappointed before running away. That too belongs to frontier life. Children grow up surrounded by exaggerated stories of gunfighters and outlaws. Dime novels transform violence into adventure. Real sheriffs spend much of their time trying desperately to avoid shootings altogether. But myth spreads faster than truth. By late afternoon, the heat becomes oppressive. Sunlight pounds against rooftops and turns the street into shimmering waves of dust and brightness. You remove your hat briefly, wiping sweat from your forehead. Walter watches from behind the desk. "You married?" he asks suddenly. "No." "Smart? Interesting response again." Walter leans back in his chair. Frontier towns are hard on families. Hard on everybody, really, but especially lawmen's families. You think about that while gazing through the jailhouse window. Across the street, a woman hangs laundry beside a boarding house. Her movements appear slow and practiced. Nearby, an older man sleeps in a chair outside the barber shop with a newspaper across his chest. The town almost looks peaceful now. Almost. Then shouting erupts from the saloon, loud enough to stop conversations up and down the street. You and Walter exchange a glance. "Well," he mutters, standing carefully, "there's your afternoon." More shouting follows. A bottle shatters. Someone laughs wildly. You step outside into blinding sunlight and immediately see people backing away from the saloon entrance. Two horses tied nearby pull nervously against their reins. The piano inside keeps playing for several strange seconds before stopping abruptly. That detail unsettles you most. The entire town seems to hold its breath. Then Frank Dalton crashes backward through the swinging saloon doors directly into the street, landing hard in the dust, while another man charges after him holding a broken chair leg like a medieval weapon. So much for a peaceful afternoon. Frank Dalton hits the dirt hard enough to raise a cloud of dust around him. For one strange second, the entire street freezes. Then chaos resumes all at once. The man with the broken chair leg storms through the saloon doors, roaring like an angry bear, while several drunken spectators spill onto the boardwalk behind him, shouting contradictory advice. Somebody laughs hysterically. Somebody else yells for bets. One terrified dog sprints beneath a wagon as though fleeing artillery fire. The frontier has many emergencies. Most involve whiskey. Frank rolls sideways, Just before the chair leg smashes into the dirt where his head had been, dust explodes upward. The attacker swings again wildly, face red from alcohol and fury. You move instinctively. Enough, you shout. Your voice cuts sharply through the noise. Not because it sounds especially powerful, mostly because nobody else has said anything sensible for several minutes. The attacker pauses briefly and turns toward you. He is broad-shouldered, middle-aged, and extremely drunk. Sweat darkens his shirt beneath the arms. His mustache appears to be losing an argument with gravity. Frank slowly rises behind him, brushing dirt from his coat with surprising calm. "Sheriff," Frank says politely, "this gentleman appears upset. You cheated." The drunk man roars. "Poorly managed cards ain't cheating." The crowd murmurs. "Wonderful gambling dispute, one of the oldest frontier traditions. Historical records show that gambling arguments caused an astonishing number of Western shootings and assaults. Faro, poker, Monte, and other games filled saloons nightly. Fortunes disappeared quickly. So did tempers. You step carefully between the two men. "What's your name?" you ask the drunk. "Harvey Benton." "And are you planning to murder Mr. Dalton with furniture?" Harvey. Harvey considers this honestly, still deciding, at least he is thoughtful. Frank folds his arms calmly, while the crowd watches with open fascination. You can almost feel the entire town evaluating you. Every movement matters now. Frontier sheriffs survive partly through reputation. If people sense weakness immediately, trouble multiplies. But if you overreact, that causes different trouble. You glance at the broken chair leg. "Hand it over." Harvey tightens his grip stubbornly. "No." Reasonable enough. Nobody ever surrenders weapons proudly in public. You lower your voice slightly. "Harvey, if you swing that thing again, I'll lock you in a cell beside Eli Turner, and the smell alone will finish the job." Several people laugh unexpectedly. Important moment. The tension softens just enough. Even Harvey blinks uncertainly before snorting through his nose. Eli smells like boiled death. "That's what I'm saying." Another ripple of laughter moves through the crowd. Frank Dalton watches you with new interest now. Eventually, Harvey drops the broken chair leg into the dirt. Problem solved, at least briefly. You motion toward the jailhouse. "Come cool off a while." Harvey points angrily toward Frank. "He still owes me $8. Frank shakes his head. "No, sir. You lost $8. Entirely different experience." Harvey starts forward again. You intercept him with one hand against his chest. "Jail, now!" Harvey grumbles continuously while you escort him down the street. Frontier drunks always complain, as though arrest personally insults civilization itself. Behind you, conversations slowly resume. People drift back toward storefronts and shaded porches. The piano inside the saloon cautiously begins playing again after several moments, sounding almost nervous now. As you reach the jailhouse, Harvey squints sideways at you. "You ain't from around here." "No." "Can tell." "How?" "You still walk like somebody expects sidewalks." Odd observation. Probably accurate. Inside the jailhouse, the air feels cooler and dimmer. Eli Turner remains stretched across his cot, looking half dead. He opens one eye as Harvey enters. "Oh, no," Eli mutters. "Not him." Harvey points dramatically. "This idiot tried singing opera at the poker table last month. It was a folk ballad. It frightened livestock." You close the cell door firmly behind Harvey before the argument develops into frontier music criticism. The iron lock clicks shut. Strangely satisfying sound. Harvey immediately sits on the cot rubbing his temples. You got any coffee? No. Cruel place. Eli nods solemnly, heartless. You settle behind the desk, while Walter Briggs chuckles quietly nearby. Handled that decent, he says. Decent means nobody got stabbed. Frontier standards remain wonderfully flexible. The afternoon drifts onward slowly after that. Heat presses against the town heavily enough to make even horses appear exhausted. Outside the jailhouse window, dust devils twist lazily through empty stretches of street. Harvey eventually falls asleep snoring loudly beside Eli. You spend the quiet hours organizing paperwork again. Though organizing may be too generous a description, mostly you create piles based on whether documents appear dangerous to touch. One report catches your attention. Missing cattle near Dry Creek. Another mentions stolen horses north of town. Livestock theft becomes one of the frontier's most serious crimes. In eastern cities, horse theft sounds almost quaint today. Out here, stealing a horse can strand someone dozens of miles from safety. Some frontier communities punish horse thieves more harshly than killers. Scholars still debate how violent the Old West truly was compared with eastern cities during the same period. Certain frontier towns recorded relatively low murder rates. Others became genuinely dangerous during mining booms or cattle seasons. But fear of isolation amplified every threat. Out here, help rarely arrives quickly. Near sunset, you finally leave the jailhouse for fresh air. The town glows beautifully beneath the lowering sun. Golden light spills across rooftops and wagon wheels. Shadows stretch long through the street. Smoke rises lazily from chimneys, while supper smells drift through open windows. Beans, bread, salt pork. Simple frontier comforts. Children play beside the church steps, chasing one another through clouds of dust. Their laughter sounds softer now in the cooling evening air. You walk slowly toward the edge of town, where the prairie begins immediately beyond the final buildings. No fences, no proper roads, just endless rolling grass beneath a vast western sky. It feels impossibly open. Beautiful, too. Many settlers describe the frontier with conflicting emotions. Awe and fear, freedom and loneliness, opportunity and exhaustion. The land gives space enough to reinvent yourself entirely. It also reminds you how small you are. A rider approaches from the distance, while you stand there watching sun-in colors spread across the horizon. At first, the figure appears almost ghost-like through drifting dust and fading light. Then closer, older man, dark coat, slow horse. He stops beside you quietly. You the sheriff? Yes. The stranger studies the town ahead. You should know something, he says softly. What's that? He looks toward the distant hills. There's men camped north of here who ask too many questions about your bank. Before you can answer, he tips his hat politely and rides onward into town without another word, leaving you alone beside the prairie while evening shadows gather slowly across the frontier. And somewhere far away beyond the hills, coyotes begin howling again. The coyotes continue howling long after darkness settles across the prairie. Their voices drift through the night air in thin, mournful waves, rising and fading beyond the hills north of town. Frontier settlers often describe coyote sounds as lonely. Others call them eerie. One exhausted traveler from the 1870s wrote that coyotes sounded like the wilderness laughing softly at human effort. Standing outside beneath the cooling sky, you understand exactly what he meant. The stars above the frontier appear impossibly bright. Without eastern factories or crowded cities to dim them, the heavens spread overhead in enormous rivers of cold white light. You can see entire bands of the Milky Way stretching across darkness like smoke frozen in place. Somewhere behind the jailhouse, a horse shifts restlessly in its sleep. And you cannot stop thinking about the stranger's warning. Men asking questions about the bank, not encouraging. Frontier banks rarely resemble grand Eastern institutions with marble walls and uniformed clerks. Most Western banks occupy ordinary wooden buildings containing modest safes and very nervous employees. Yet even small frontier banks attract dangerous attention because isolated towns often lack organized protection. A determined gang can arrive, rob a bank, and disappear into hundreds of empty miles before nearby lawmen even hear about it. You finally head toward the saloon, partly for information, partly because every road in a frontier town eventually leads there anyway. Warm light spills through the swinging doors as you step inside. The smell hits first: whiskey, tobacco smoke, sweat, sawdust, and roasted meat combine into a scent so thick it almost feels chewable. Conversation softens briefly when people notice the badge, then gradually resumes. The piano player in the corner continues hammering away at a tune that wanders dangerously close to collapse before recovering at the last moment. A poker game unfolds near the back wall beneath hanging oil lamps. Cowboys crowd the bar shoulder to shoulder, while several exhausted dance hall girls move through the room carrying drinks. The frontier runs on caffeine by morning and alcohol by evening. Frank Dalton sits near the poker table holding a glass of whiskey. He notices you immediately. "Sheriff," he says with relaxed politeness. "Nobody's thrown furniture lately. Promising night so far." "Still young. That's the spirit." You move toward the bar carefully, aware of eyes following you again. Saloon rooms operate like strange ecosystems. News spreads instantly. Arguments bloom without warning. Alliances shift by the hour. And everybody watches everybody else. The bartender approaches while wiping a glass with a rag that perhaps should not be trusted near human food. What'll it be? Coffee? The bartender stares at you with visible disappointment. You lawmen really know how to wound a business? Still, he pours coffee from a dented pot sitting near the stove. The liquid tastes approximately half coffee and half campfire, but it is hot. That counts for something. You glance around the room while drinking slowly. Several miners argue quietly near the staircase. A ranch hand sleeps face down across one table, while his friends continue gambling around him as though unconsciousness were a personality trait. Near the far wall sits the town doctor. You recognize him immediately, because frontier doctors always look tired beyond ordinary human limitations. He raises 2 fingers toward you in greeting. You walk over. "Sheriff," he says. "Dr. Samuel Reed." His handshake feels ink-stained and surprisingly gentle. You look exhausted. You tell him? "So do you." "Fair enough." "Doctor." Reed gestures toward the empty chair beside him. "You settling in?" "Trying." The doctor nods knowingly. "This town grows on people eventually, like mold." Interesting choice of metaphor from a medical professional. You ask quietly about the warning from the rider outside town. The doctor's expression changes slightly. "Bank rumors. So you've heard them too." "Everybody has." He sips black coffee from a chipped mug. 3 strangers came through 2 days ago asking about payroll deliveries. Railroad money, mostly. Railroad payrolls. Large amounts of cash moving through isolated territory. Exactly the sort of thing that attracts desperate men. Historically, frontier outlaws often targeted trains, banks, and stagecoaches carrying payroll funds because Western expansion depended heavily on transporting physical currency across enormous distances. And enormous distances make robbery easier. You know who the strangers were, you ask? Doctor? Reed shakes his head. No, but people noticed them. Quiet men. Kept checking exits. Frank Dalton suddenly appears beside your table without invitation. Evening, Doctor. Doctor! Reed sighs softly. Frank? Frank leans one shoulder against the wall. Heard you discussing bandits. Eavesdropping now, the doctor asks. No, sir. Saloon walls just leak conversation. Likely true. Frank glances toward you. Town gets nervous easy. Probably nothing. Probably. Frank smiles faintly. Sheriff, if frontier people waited for certainty before panicking, we'd have no entertainment at all. Several nearby gamblers laugh quietly. You study Frank carefully again. Men like him remain difficult to read. He carries himself confidently, but not recklessly. His politeness feels genuine sometimes, performed at others. The Old West contains many such figures, neither fully outlaw nor fully respectable. Cattlemen who occasionally threaten witnesses, gamblers who help churches rebuild after fires, lawmen who break laws quietly when convenient. Frontier morality often exists in uncomfortable shades rather than simple categories. A dance hall girl carrying drinks passes your table. You staying long? Sheriff? She asks casually. Don't know yet. She smiles sadly. That's usually the answer around here. Then she moves on through drifting smoke and piano music. Her comment lingers with you. People arrive in frontier towns constantly, some seeking fortunes, others escaping failures, debts, war memories, broken marriages, or Eastern factories that swallowed entire lives. The frontier promises reinvention, but it rarely promises permanence. Later, near midnight, you finally leave the saloon. The town has quieted considerably. Lanterns flicker low behind windows. Wind brushes softly through empty streets, carrying the smell of cooling ashes from stoves and fireplaces. Somewhere far away, thunder murmurs faintly beyond the plains. Storm coming, perhaps. You walk slowly back toward the jailhouse, beneath cold starlight. Then stop suddenly. The bank door stands slightly open. Not wide, just enough. Your hand moves instinctively toward your revolver. The street remains silent around you. No movement, no voices, only wind. You step closer carefully, boots whispering through dust. The open door creaks softly. Inside the dark bank building, something shifts, and you realize with sudden certainty that you are no longer alone. The bank doorway yawns open before you like a dark mouth. For a moment, you simply stand there listening. Wind brushes dust across the empty street behind you. Somewhere farther away, a loose sign creaks slowly on rusty chains. The piano music from the saloon has finally stopped, leaving the town wrapped in that strange frontier silence which never feels truly peaceful. You rest one hand near your revolver, not gripping it yet, just ready. Inside the bank, something scrapes softly against wood. You step forward carefully. The building smells faintly of lamp oil, old paper, and dry lumber heated all day beneath prairie sun. Moonlight spills weakly through the front windows, laying pale silver bars across the floorboards. Your boots creak once, The sound feels incredibly loud. Then a voice whispers from the darkness, "Don't shoot." You freeze. A figure slowly rises from behind the counter with both hands raised awkwardly. Thin man, sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled beyond repair. Not a robber, just terrified. The Lord above. The man breathes shakily. "You nearly killed me. You're in the bank after midnight." "Yes." The door's open. "Yes." You hiding behind furniture. The man thinks about this. When you say it aloud, "I admit the situation sounds suspicious." You lower your hand slightly. The stranger steps forward into moonlight. "Milton Avery," he says nervously. "Bank clerk." He looks exactly like a bank clerk should look. Narrow shoulders, ink stains on his cuffs, expression of permanent concern. "What are you doing here?" Milton wipes sweat from his forehead, despite the cool night air. "Moving payroll money. At midnight. That's when fewer people notice." You glance toward the back office. "How much money?" "Enough to encourage terrible decisions." "Fair answer." Milton lowers his voice. "We received word about possible robbery attempts." "So the rumors are true." "Perhaps." He hesitates again. "Or perhaps everybody in town enjoys frightening one another. Hard to tell sometimes." "Also fair." You help him carry several heavy lockboxes toward the rear vault, while lantern light flickers weakly across the walls. The vault itself appears less impressive than expected. Thick iron door, large lock, very little elegance. Frontier security tends toward practicality. Milton works quickly, hands trembling slightly as he checks ledgers and locks. Outside, thunder murmurs again across the distant plains. "Storm definitely coming now." "You always stay this nervous?" you ask quietly. Milton glances up. "I work in a wooden building, full of cash, surrounded by desperate people and open prairie. So, yes." Reasonable again. Once the vault is secured, you step back outside together. The town looks almost ghostly beneath the stars. Most windows stand dark now, except for the saloon and one upstairs room at the hotel where someone still moves behind curtains. Milton locks the bank carefully, then checks the lock again. "And once more after that. You should get some sleep." You tell him. He gives a tiny laugh. Sleep on the frontier is mostly theoretical. Before leaving, Milton pauses beside you. "You know what scares me most, Sheriff? Robbers." "No." He studies the empty street. "It's how quickly towns can vanish." "Interesting answer." Milton gestures vaguely toward the buildings around you. "People think Western towns feel permanent once they get churches and banks and painted signs. But drought comes, or railroad routes change, or silver mines dry up. Suddenly, half the population disappears in 6 months." He adjusts his glasses tiredly. "Sometimes I think everybody here lives with one foot already pointed elsewhere." Then he heads toward the boarding house, carrying a lantern that bobs softly through darkness. You remain outside a little longer. The frontier night feels enormous around you now. Cold wind slides through the street, carrying distant rain smell from the plains. Clouds drift slowly across the stars, swallowing pieces of light one section at a time. Eventually, you return to the jailhouse. Inside, Eli Turner snores loudly enough to qualify as weather. Harvey Benton lies awake on the opposite cot, staring at the ceiling. "Sheriff?" "Yes." "You ever notice drunk cells smell like boiled boots and regret?" "Trying not to." Harvey nods thoughtfully. "Smart." You settle behind the desk, removing your hat slowly. Exhaustion presses against you suddenly. The kind that arrives after tension fades rather than during danger itself. Frontier sheriffs rarely sleep properly. Too many noises, too many possibilities. Even historical lawmen wrote frequently about exhaustion in journals and letters. Some slept with revolvers beneath pillows. Others developed habits of waking repeatedly throughout the night, simply to check streets outside their windows. You understand why already. Near dawn, the storm finally arrives. Rain pounds the rooftops hard enough to shake windows. Thunder crashes across the prairie, while lightning flashes through gaps in the curtains, turning the jailhouse white for brief, violent seconds. Harvey sits upright immediately. "Good storm," he mutters approvingly. "You rate storms now." "Absolutely." Eli groans from beneath his blanket. "Some people discuss weather. Harvey critiques it like theater." Lightning flashes again. For a moment, the entire town outside becomes visible in sharp silver detail. Empty streets, wagons rocking slightly in wind, rain hammering the dusty road into mud. Then darkness returns. You move toward the window, watching the storm carefully, and notice a rider far down Main Street, barely visible through rain. The horse moves slowly, deliberately, toward the center of town despite the weather. The rider wears a long, dark coat, dripping water beneath flashes of lightning. Harvey sees the figure, too. "That's strange." "Why? Nobody rides voluntarily in storms like this." The rider stops outside the telegraph office, just sits there motionless beneath pouring rain. "Watching?" Then another lightning flash illuminates the street, and you realize the rider is not alone. Two more figures wait farther back in the storm, almost invisible against the darkness. Your exhaustion disappears instantly. You grab your coat and hat. Walter Briggs stumbles awake from the back room, rubbing his eyes. "What's happening?" You keep watching the shadowy riders through rain-streaked glass. "I think," you say quietly, "our trouble just arrived." Thunder rolls across the frontier again, while the three riders remain motionless in the storm outside town. Waiting, rain hammers the town so hard it nearly drowns every other sound. Water rushes along the edges of Main Street in muddy streams. Lanterns flicker weakly behind rain-streaked windows, while thunder rolls endlessly across the plains like distant artillery. Frontier storms possess a strange violence, with no forests or mountains nearby to soften the wind. The weather simply charges across open land with terrifying confidence. And in the middle of it stand three riders, waiting. You tighten your coat and step outside the jailhouse, beneath the covered boardwalk. Cold rain sprays sideways immediately, soaking one sleeve before you even reach the edge. Walter Briggs peers nervously beside you. Maybe they're travelers. You glance sideways. "Walter?" "Fine," he mutters. "Terrible travelers." The riders remain near the telegraph office. Their horses shift restlessly in the storm, hooves splashing through muddy streets. Lightning flashes again, briefly illuminating dark hats pulled low against the rain. Nobody moves. The entire scene feels unreal somehow. Then the nearest rider finally nudges his horse forward. Slowly, deliberately, he approaches through pounding rain until stopping several yards from the jailhouse. Water streams from his coat and hat brim continuously. You cannot clearly see his face. "Sheriff," the rider calls calmly. His voice sounds older than expected. You keep one hand near your revolver. "What do you want?" The rider removes his hat at last. Gray beard, hard eyes, deep scars crossing one cheek. Not a young outlaw chasing excitement, This man looks tired in the way only long years of dangerous work can produce. "We're looking for shelter," he says. Walter exhales quietly beside you, but something still feels wrong. "At 2 in the morning, you ask?" The rider shrugs slightly. "Storm didn't ask our permission." Fair point again. The frontier keeps producing inconveniently reasonable, suspicious people. You study the other two riders behind him, younger men, armed, silent. "Names, you ask?" The older rider hesitates. "Interesting." Finally he answers, "Name's Amos Crowley." You do not recognize it. That means little. The West contains thousands of drifting cowboys, former soldiers, prospectors, hunters, and gunmen whose names never appear in newspapers or history books. Still, Walter suddenly stiffens beside you. You notice immediately. You know him. Walter lowers his voice carefully. Maybe. Not comforting. Amos Crowley notices too. That depends, Amos says evenly, whether your friend remembers correctly. Rain crashes against rooftops while thunder shakes the street again. You realize several townspeople are now watching secretly from darkened windows nearby. Frontier communities possess remarkable instincts for trouble. People wake quickly when danger approaches. "Why come here, you ask?" Amos wipes rainwater from his beard. "Need food, dry beds, fresh horses by morning, and money." One of the younger riders smiles faintly at that. Amos remains expressionless. "Everybody needs money, Sheriff." Not technically false. You glance toward the telegraph office. If these men truly intend robbery, the bank sits only 2 buildings farther down the street. "How long you planning to stay?" "Till the storm eases." Lightning flashes again, illuminating revolver grips beneath wet coats. Walter shifts nervously beside you. The rain smell mixes now with horse sweat and mud. Somewhere nearby, shutters bang wildly in the wind. The entire town feels balanced on a thin edge. Then unexpectedly, Amos sighs. "You know what the funny thing is," he says. "No." Half the trouble in frontier towns starts because frightened men expect trouble. His gaze drifts toward your revolver. "Other half starts because they don't." That line hangs heavily in the rain-filled darkness. Historical frontier encounters often unfolded exactly this way. Long stretches of uncertainty, men studying one another carefully. Violence sometimes arrived suddenly. Other times, suspicion dissolved into ordinary conversation and shared coffee. The West rarely followed predictable scripts. Finally, you nod toward the hotel. You can stable your horses there. No shooting, no stealing, no drunkenness. One younger rider laughs openly. Drunkenness? In a frontier town, bold policy. Amos silences him with a glance. "We'll behave ourselves." "You hope so." The 3 riders move slowly toward the hotel through pouring rain. Town windows quietly darken again one by one as nervous citizens retreat from their secret observations. Walter watches the riders disappear. "That's Amos Crowley," he whispers. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure." "Who is he?" Walter swallows. "Used to ride with a gang down in New Mexico territory years ago. Robberies, mostly. Couple killings, maybe?" "Maybe." Frontier records remain frustratingly uncertain about many outlaws because newspapers exaggerated constantly while witnesses contradicted one another. Entire gunfights entered legend despite questionable evidence. Some notorious killers likely murdered fewer people than rumors claimed. Others escaped history almost completely. Still, Walter sounds genuinely afraid. You think he's here for the bank. Walter looks toward the storm-dark hotel windows. I think men like that rarely travel without reasons. The rest of the night passes slowly after that. You remain awake inside the jailhouse while rain pounds outside endlessly. Harvey Benton eventually falls asleep again, despite occasional thunder rattling the windows hard enough to shake dust from ceiling beams. Eli Turner does not. He sits quietly on his cot, watching lightning flashes through the bars. Storms make people honest sometimes. Eli murmurs suddenly. How's that? Can't pretend you're in control during weather like this? Interesting thought. Outside, dawn finally begins creeping weakly into the storm clouds. Gray light spreads across soaked streets while exhausted horses stand steaming beside hitching posts. The rain eases gradually. By sunrise, the town looks transformed. Mud covers everything. Wagon wheels sink deep into the street. Boardwalks glisten with water. Steam rises faintly from rooftops as the storm drifts eastward across the plains. And then comes the sound, the telegraph machine, sharp metallic clicking from across the street. Rapid! Urgent! Walter immediately looks up. That can't be good. The telegraph operator appears moments later running through the mud toward the jailhouse, clutching a damp sheet of paper. He bursts through the door, breathless. "Sheriff," he gasps. "Message from Wichita." You take the paper quickly. The telegram is short. Looking for 3 men. Stop. Amos Crowley suspected in Kansas. Bank robbery. Stop. Armed and dangerous. Stop. Silence fills the jailhouse. Even Harvey stops snoring briefly, which feels historically significant. You slowly fold the telegram. Outside, morning sunlight finally breaks through storm clouds and spills across the muddy frontier town. And somewhere inside the hotel, 3 armed men are waking up. Morning sunlight spreads slowly across the soaked town, turning puddles into sheets of pale gold. The storm has scrubbed the frontier clean for a few brief hours. Dust is gone. Mud replaces it instead. Wagon wheels carve deep grooves through Main Street, while horses splash water onto nearby boardwalks. Steam rises faintly from rooftops, warming beneath the returning sun. And somewhere upstairs inside the hotel sleep 3 men possibly wanted for bank robbery. You stare at the folded telegram in your hand. Walter Briggs stares too. Neither of you speaks immediately. The telegraph operator finally breaks the silence. "Bad news?" he asks nervously. Walter answers, "Before you can." When telegrams arrive at dawn mentioning armed men, the answer's usually yes. The operator nods sadly, as though this confirms existing philosophical beliefs about frontier life. You read the telegram again carefully. Looking for 3 men. Stop Amos Crowley suspected in Kansas bank robbery. Stop armed and dangerous. Stop. Suspected, not convicted. Not confirmed. Frontier justice often operates inside uncomfortable uncertainty. Telegraph descriptions can be wrong. Witnesses misidentify people constantly. Sometimes innocent travelers are arrested because they resemble vague newspaper sketches created by reporters who may never have seen the suspects themselves. Still, your stomach tightens uneasily. Walter lowers his voice. What now? Good question. You glance toward the hotel across the muddy street. Curtains hang still behind several upstairs windows. No movement yet. Historically, many frontier sheriffs faced impossible odds during arrests. Small towns rarely had organized police forces. Deputies might be drunk, absent, unreliable, or related to the suspect, and telegraphs brought alarming news faster than manpower. Often a sheriff simply handled dangerous situations with whatever courage or luck remained available. You pour yourself coffee from yesterday's pot. The taste suggests mild poisoning. You got deputies besides me? Walter asks. You're a deputy now? Walter looks mildly horrified. I was hoping we skipped that part. Not feeling patriotic. I'm feeling old. Fair enough. You eventually decide on caution over heroics. Another underrated frontier survival strategy. Wake Milton Avery at the bank. You tell Walter. Quietly. Tell him lock everything down. Walter nods and leaves through the front door. The telegraph operator remains standing awkwardly nearby. You need anything else, Sheriff? Yes. What? Fresh coffee. He considers this seriously. That may exceed current technology. Then he leaves too, across the room. Harvey Benton watches you from his cell. You planning a gunfight? Planning to avoid one. Harvey seems disappointed again. You frontier people really crave excitement. You mutter. Harvey points toward the muddy window. Friend, nobody moves this far west because they enjoy predictable afternoons. Hard to argue with that. By mid-morning, the town slowly learns something is wrong. Not officially. Frontier communities rarely require official announcements. Information leaks naturally through barber shops, hotel kitchens, stable boys, saloons, church porches, and women hanging laundry beside fences. Within an hour, conversations soften whenever you pass. People glance toward the hotel constantly. The town begins holding its breath. You walk across Main Street carefully, boots sinking slightly into wet mud. Above you, clouds drift apart, revealing endless blue western sky again. The beauty feels almost insulting compared with the tension underneath it. Inside the hotel lobby, the owner polishes glasses nervously behind a small counter. Morning, Sheriff. You seen our guests? The hotel owner nods toward the staircase. Still upstairs. Ordered breakfast. What did they order? He blinks. Eggs. Dangerous men still eat breakfast, you say quietly. The owner thinks about this, comforting in a strange way. You climb the staircase slowly. Every creak sounds dramatic now. Halfway up, you notice your own heartbeat. Fast, not uncontrollable, just honest. The second-floor hallway smells faintly of soap, wet boots, and old wallpaper. Sunlight spills through narrow windows onto faded carpet runners, worn thin by decades of travelers. You stop outside room 7. Voices inside. One younger man laughing softly. Then Amos Crowley. Town's nervous. Another voice answers. They should be. Wonderful. You knock once. Silence follows immediately. A chair scrapes softly inside the room. Then Amos opens the door halfway. He appears freshly shaved now, though the scar across his cheek remains stark in morning light. His expression reveals nothing. Sheriff, need to talk. Amos studies your face carefully. You get a telegram. Not a question? Interesting again. How'd you know? He smiles faintly. Frontier towns only have 3 speeds. Bored, drunk, nervous. Fair observation. You glance past him into the room. The younger riders sit near the window, eating breakfast from chipped plates. Revolver belts hang nearby within easy reach. Nobody looks relaxed anymore. You decide against subtlety. Telegram says you're wanted in Kansas. One rider mutters something unpleasant under his breath. Amos remains calm. Telegram says suspected. Yes. Important difference. Depends who's holding the gun. That almost earns another smile from him. For several long seconds, nobody speaks. Finally, Amos steps fully into the hallway and quietly closes the door behind him. We robbed no bank. He says, You expect me to trust that? No, at least he understands the situation. Amos leans one shoulder against the wall. We work trail security near Wichita. Payroll shipment got robbed anyway. Somebody blamed us because we disappeared afterward. Why disappear? Because angry posies ask fewer questions than bullets. You study him carefully. He sounds believable, dangerously believable. The Old West produces endless, uncertain truths. Some men lie beautifully. Others tell honest stories that sound false. Lawmen often must judge character quickly, using instinct more than evidence. A difficult system. One historian later described frontier justice as human guesswork, wearing a badge. Downstairs, the hotel lobby door suddenly slams open hard enough to rattle windows. Shouting follows. Several voices. Angry. Amos closes his eyes briefly. Ah, he mutters. There it is. You hurry downstairs immediately. A group of townsmen crowds the lobby, holding rifles and shotguns. Walter Briggs stands among them, looking deeply uncomfortable. Near the front stands Frank Dalton, gripping a Winchester rifle, loosely across one arm. The telegram spread. Walter says unnecessarily. Clearly, Frank looks toward the staircase where Amos now appears behind you. That him one rancher demands. Several men raise weapons slightly. The room tightens instantly. You step forward fast. Easy. Nobody said hard yet. Frank replies calmly, but his rifle remains ready. The hotel owner ducks behind the counter entirely, perhaps reconsidering career choices. One townsman spits onto the floorboards. Kansas wants those men. Amos descends the stairs slowly without reaching for his gun. Funny thing about Kansas, he says quietly. Always wanting something. Nobody laughs. You suddenly realize the entire town stands one nervous heartbeat away from violence, and every eye now turns toward you to decide what happens next. The hotel lobby feels suddenly too small for the number of armed men inside it. Mud drips from boots onto the wooden floorboards. Wet coats steam faintly in the warmth of the building. Rifles remain half-raised. Hands hover near revolvers. Nobody breathes normally anymore. You stand between two groups of men who clearly do not trust one another, an underrated part of frontier sheriff work. Frank Dalton rests his Winchester against one shoulder with casual confidence, though his eyes remain sharp and cold. Beside him, several ranchers grip weapons awkwardly. Nervous men often hold rifles too tightly. Their knuckles whiten, their shoulders stiffen. Dangerous signs. Across the room, Amos Crowley and his companions stand near the staircase, calm, watchful, tired. The younger riders seem ready for violence. Amos does not, at least not yet. You got proof against us, Amos asks evenly. One rancher spits again. Kansas telegram's enough. No, Amos replies, it isn't. The rancher starts stepping forward. You move immediately. That's enough. Your voice cracks through the lobby sharply. Not loud exactly, just firm enough to interrupt the momentum building inside the room. The rancher glares at you. You protecting outlaws now? No, I'm protecting idiots from becoming corpses. That earns several uneasy looks. Frank Dalton studies you carefully again. You can almost see him reassessing your usefulness in real time. The frontier respects confidence more than perfection. Still, the tension refuses to disappear. A woman peeks nervously from the dining room doorway, clutching a coffee pot against her chest like armor. Upstairs, somewhere beyond the hallway, a floorboard creaks softly. Even the hotel itself seems anxious. Historical frontier confrontations often depended less on gun skill than emotional control. Many shootings erupted because frightened or drunken men refused to step backward once pride entered the room. You decide pride must leave first. Everybody lower the guns, you say. Nobody moves. Wonderful. You look directly at Frank Dalton. You first. Interesting gamble. The room watches him carefully. Frank could embarrass you here. Refuse publicly. Challenge authority before the entire town. Frontier reputations rise and collapse through moments exactly like this. Instead, after several long seconds, Frank slowly lowers the rifle. One rancher mutters angrily. Frank silences him with a glance. "Sheriff's right," Frank says calmly. "No point painting the hotel walls this early." Relief moves quietly through the room. Not complete relief, just enough. Gradually, the others lower weapons too. Amos Crowley nods once toward Frank. "Appreciated. Don't mistake me for friendly," Frank replies. "Wouldn't dream of it." You finally exhale properly for what feels like the first time all morning. Then Walter Briggs leans close beside you. "There's another problem." "Of course there is." "What now?" "The bank closed after the telegram spread." You blink. "So," Walter gestures toward the lobby windows. "Town payroll's due today." "Ah, the frontier always finds fresh ways to complicate disaster." Outside, you can already hear voices gathering along Main Street, workers expecting wages, ranch hands needing supplies, miners wanting cash before leaving for nearby camps. Frontier economies run on immediate money. Delays create anger surprisingly fast. And angry towns full of armed men rarely improve situations. You step toward the doorway carefully. Everybody stays calm. You announce. Nobody looks convinced. Outside, the muddy street has become crowded. Wagons line the road, while townspeople cluster beneath boardwalks, discussing rumors in anxious, low voices. Several men glance toward the hotel windows expectantly. The news has spread completely now. Somebody notices Amos standing behind you inside the lobby. "There he is," a voice shouts. The crowd stirs dangerously. You move onto the boardwalk fast. Quiet. Gradually, the noise softens. Mostly. You realize something important then? Frontier towns rarely panic because of confirmed facts. They panic because uncertainty leaves room for imagination, and imagination out here tends toward violence. You raise the folded telegram. "This says suspected," you announce loudly, "not convicted." Murmurs ripple through the crowd. One miner folds his arms. "So what happens now?" "Good question again." Historically, frontier sheriffs often lacked clear procedures for interstate warrants and telegraph accusations. Communication moved faster than legal systems could adapt. Sometimes suspects waited weeks for proper authorities. Sometimes posses skipped legalities entirely. The Old West frequently balanced somewhere between law and improvisation. "We verify the message," you say finally. How someone asks, "By telegraph?" Several people groan immediately. Telegraph delays frustrate entire generations of frontier citizens. Messages arrive garbled. Operators mistranslate names. Storms interrupt lines. One Western newspaper famously complained that telegraph communication travels with impressive speed directly into confusion. Walter steps beside you quietly. "Could take until tomorrow." The crowd dislikes that answer intensely. You notice Amos Crowley watching from the hotel doorway behind you. His expression remains unreadable. Then unexpectedly, "Doctor." Samuel Reed pushes through the crowd carrying his worn medical bag. "Well," the doctor says dryly, "nobody's bleeding yet." Remarkable restraint. A few nervous laughs follow. The doctor glances toward Amos. You know, he says thoughtfully, I once treated a man in Dodge City who got arrested 3 separate times because he resembled an outlaw sketch. What happened? Someone asks. Turned out he actually was an outlaw eventually, just not yet. That does not help at all. Even you laugh quietly despite yourself. The tension eases again by small degrees. Important progress. Then suddenly, a gunshot explodes somewhere behind the buildings near the stable district. The crowd jerks violently. Several people scream. Horses rear and pull against their reins. Another gunshot cracks through the morning air. You turn instantly toward the sound, while people scatter across the muddy street in confusion. Walter grabs your arm. That came from the bank. Without thinking further, you sprint through the mud toward the rear alleyways behind Main Street, while frightened townspeople shout behind you. Boots splash through puddles. Wagons block half the narrow lane. Somewhere ahead, men are yelling. Then you see them. 2 masked riders charging away from the rear entrance of the bank. One carries a heavy canvas satchel, and suddenly the entire town's attention shifts away from Amos Crowley completely. Because somebody just robbed the bank anyway. The masked riders tear through the muddy alley behind the bank like frightened wolves. Their horses kick water and dirt into the air with every stride. One rider leans low over the saddle, clutching the heavy canvas satchel against his chest, while the other twists backward, firing wildly behind him. The gunshot cracks against nearby buildings hard enough to startle birds from rooftops. You dive sideways behind a wagon instinctively. Mud splashes across your coat. Somewhere behind you, townspeople scream and scatter beneath the boardwalks. Horses rear violently against hitching posts. The entire peaceful morning collapses into confusion within seconds. Frontier life changes direction quickly. You pull your revolver free at last. The metal feels cold and strangely heavy in your hand. Ahead, the riders burst from the alley into open prairie, beyond town limits, fast, experienced, their horses clearly chosen for speed rather than appearance. Walter Briggs comes stumbling behind you, breathless. Lord above, he gasps. They actually robbed it. A third gunshot echoes across the open land. This one farther away now. The riders continue fleeing north, across rolling grassland, while townspeople begin cautiously emerging from hiding. Voices overlap everywhere. Questions. You make a decision quickly. Get horses. Walter stares at you. You mean our horses? Yes, Walter. Preferably not imaginary ones. Walter hurries toward the stable, muttering deeply pessimistic opinions about aging and gunfire. You sprint toward the bank instead. Milton Avery stands near the rear entrance, looking pale enough to disappear entirely. Papers scatter across muddy ground around him, while one shattered window hangs crooked beside the door. Milton. He jumps violently. Oh, thank heaven. You hurt? No. Emotionally, perhaps. Fair? Milton adjusts his glasses with trembling fingers. They came through the back alley, masked, shot the lock off the cash room. How much did they take? Enough to ruin my entire week. Also fair. You kneel beside the broken lock, examining splintered wood and scattered metal fragments. The robbers moved efficiently. No wasted motion, no drunken recklessness. Professionals, perhaps, or at least experienced amateurs. Did you recognize them, you ask? Milton hesitates. One sounded young, helpful. Anything else? They knew exactly where the payroll boxes were. That matters. Bank robberies on the frontier often depended upon local information, payroll schedules, vault locations, weak entrances, and escape routes rarely remained fully secret in small towns. Somebody usually talked. The question becomes, who? A crowd gathers rapidly outside the bank now, faces anxious, excited too. Frontier towns possess an uncomfortable relationship with violence. People fear it deeply, while simultaneously feeling drawn toward the drama surrounding it. Frank Dalton appears near the doorway, carrying his Winchester again. "Robbers head north?" he asks. "Yes." Frank studies the distant hills. "That country gets rough fast. You offering help?" Frank shrugs. "You're the sheriff." Not exactly a refusal. Before you can answer, Amos Crowley emerges from the hotel across the street. The crowd reacts immediately. Murmurs spread again. Suspicion returns instantly now that adrenaline has somewhere convenient to point. One rancher shouts angrily. Maybe his gang did it. Several others nod. Amos stops walking. "You think we robbed a bank while trapped inside a hotel full of witnesses?" The rancher squints uncertainly. "Could have had friends. Could have had flying buffalo, too." Amos replies dryly. Oddly persuasive argument. Still, the suspicion lingers. You notice Amos watching the distant prairie carefully. "Something bothering you, you ask?" He nods once. "Those riders. What about them?" "They split too clean." You frown slightly. "Meaning?" "Most robbers panic leaving town. Those men rode disciplined, one covering while the other carried weight." He pauses thoughtfully. "Looks military, almost." Interesting observation. Many frontier outlaws possess Civil War experience. The war ended less than 20 years earlier. Thousands of veterans drift west afterward carrying trauma, weapons knowledge, and limited economic opportunities. Historians still debate how deeply the Civil War shaped Western violence afterward, but former soldiers undeniably appear everywhere throughout frontier history. Walter finally returns leading 2 horses through the mud. Both animals look deeply offended by recent weather. "You riding?" Walter asks hopefully. "You too." Walter closes his eyes briefly, as though personally betrayed by fate. The crowd parts while you saddle up quickly. Excitement crackles through the town now like static electricity. Children climb barrels for better views. Women call warnings from porches. Men offer contradictory advice loudly, despite contributing nothing useful. Classic frontier emergency management. Milton Avery steps closer nervously. "Sheriff." "Yes." "If you recover the payroll money, you'll survive the week, possibly the month." You mount your horse carefully. The saddle creaks beneath shifting leather still damp from the storm. Frank Dalton suddenly steps forward. "You'll need another rider." You study him. "Why volunteer?" Frank smiles faintly. "Because somebody robbed my town." Interesting phrasing. My town. Perhaps frontier loyalties run deeper than expected. Before you answer, Amos Crowley speaks from behind the crowd. He's right. Every head turns toward him. Amos folds his arms calmly. "Those robbers know the northern trails." "Sheriff doesn't." "And you do?" someone asks suspiciously. "Yes." The silence that follows feels enormous. One rancher immediately objects. "You ain't riding anywhere armed." Amos looks genuinely tired now. "Friend, if I wanted your bank money, I would have left before breakfast." That earns reluctant consideration from several faces. You realize the situation has become absurd. The town wants help catching robbers. The best available guides may be suspected outlaws. Frontier justice again balancing atop improvisation. Walter leans toward you quietly. "This feels like a terrible idea." "Probably." "You still doing it?" You glance toward the distant prairie where the robbers disappeared. Yes. Walter sighs, the sigh of a man whose peaceful retirement plans have died unexpectedly. Within minutes, the posse forms. You, Walter Briggs, Frank Dalton, Amos Crowley, one of Amos's younger riders named Cole, and two nervous ranchers carrying enough ammunition to invade small countries accidentally. The townspeople watch silently as you ride north out of town beneath the brightening western sky. Mud gives way gradually to open grassland. Wind bends the prairie in long, rolling waves. Behind you, the frontier town shrinks smaller with every passing minute, until finally it resembles nothing more than scattered wooden shapes against endless land. Ahead waits uncertainty, and somewhere beyond the hills ride two armed robbers carrying stolen payroll money across the vast, lonely frontier. The prairie opens endlessly in every direction once you leave the town behind. There are no fences here, no roads in the way most people understand them, only faint tracks pressed into grass by cattle, wagons, and time itself. The wind moves constantly across the land, bending tall grass in slow, rolling patterns that look almost like waves on an invisible sea. Your horses breathe heavily beneath you as the posse rides north. Hoofbeats soften quickly on the damp ground left by last night's storm. The air smells clean in a way towns never manage, sharp with wet earth and distant sage. Above you, the sky feels too large again, pressing down gently with that familiar frontier feeling of exposure. You ride in a loose line. Walter Briggs keeps glancing nervously left and right, as though expecting the landscape itself to produce an ambush. Frank Dalton rides slightly ahead, relaxed but alert. Amos Crowley stays near the middle, quiet, scanning the horizon with practiced stillness. His younger companion Cole watches everything with restless intensity. Nobody speaks much. There is a reason for that. On the frontier, silence is often safer than conversation. After about an hour, you slow near a rise in the land where wheel tracks split in two directions. Walter points. Which way? You study the ground carefully. Mud here still holds impressions from recent passage. Two sets of horse tracks clearly broke off from the main path, one heading northeast toward rocky hills, the other veering toward flatter open plains. Frank dismounts first. He kneels beside the tracks, brushing damp dirt gently with gloved fingers. They split on purpose, he says. Cole snorts. Of course they did. Amos remains mounted. Which one carries weight? Frank looks up. Hard to say. That is not comforting. Frontier tracking often depends on subtle clues most people would miss entirely. Weight distribution, hoof depth, stride irregularity, and how soil compacts after rain. Experienced riders like ranchers, soldiers, or hunters can sometimes read these signs like written language. Others see only mud. Walter sighs. So we pick one and hope. In a manner of speaking, you answer. Amos suddenly points toward the northeast trail. There. Everyone turns. What makes you sure, you ask? He studies the horizon. That direction avoids settlements for the longest stretch. Logical. Criminals prefer distance from witnesses. Frank nods slowly. I agree. Walter groans quietly. That's two suspicious men agreeing on something? I don't like the math. Still, decision made. You steer your horse toward the rocky hills. The terrain changes gradually as you ride. Grass thins into scattered patches. Stones appear more frequently. The land rises in uneven folds that make visibility unpredictable. Every ridge hides the possibility of movement beyond it. The frontier begins to feel less like open land and more like a maze carved by nature. After another hour, you find evidence: a broken wooden crate half buried in dirt, fresh hoof prints circling a narrow ravine, a single dropped coin glinting faintly in sunlight between stones. Walter picks it up carefully. Silver. Payroll, you ask? He nods grimly. That changes everything. Now there is no doubt the robbers passed this way. The posse tightens formation automatically. Even Frank Dalton's relaxed posture disappears slightly. Amos Crowley studies the ravine ahead. This is where they slow down, he says quietly. Why, Cole asks. Because ahead gets rough. The ravine narrows between steep rocky walls. Wind funnels through it in strange whispers. Grass disappears completely, replaced by jagged stone and loose gravel. You dismount. The others follow, leading horses now. You move carefully into the narrow passage. The sound of the outside world fades almost instantly. Even wind becomes muffled here. The silence feels unnatural. Walter whispers, I don't like canyons. Why not, Frank asks. They remind me things can fall on you from every direction at once. Hard to argue with that logic. Halfway through the ravine, Amos suddenly raises one hand. Everyone stops. He listens, then slowly crouches. What is it, you ask? Movement. Cole grips his rifle tighter. From somewhere ahead, faint voices echo through rock walls. Not clear enough to understand words, but definitely human. The robbers. You signal quietly for everyone to spread slightly. Frontier law enforcement often relies on small tactical adjustments rather than formal strategy. There are no reinforcements coming, no backup. Only whoever is standing beside you right now. You move forward carefully on foot, boots scraping gravel softly. Frank stays left, Amos right. Walter remains behind you, looking like he regrets every life decision leading to this moment. The canyon bends sharply ahead. You hear horses first, then voices more clearly. Faster! We're too exposed here. Another voice responds. Just keep moving. You crouch behind a rock and peer around the corner. Two riders, the same from the bank. One holds the canvas satchel tightly against his saddle. They are stopped briefly near a narrow exit of the ravine where terrain opens into steep hillside beyond. Escape route narrowing, perfect place for desperation. You signal silently to the others. Frank lifts his rifle slightly. Amos shakes his head once. Not yet. The robbers suddenly begin moving again, but then something changes. A third sound appears behind them. Hoofbeats. Fast, approaching from deeper inside the canyon. Everyone freezes. The robbers turn sharply, and from the shadows behind them, another group of riders emerges. Not you. Not Frank. Not Amos. Another posse entirely. Larger, unfamiliar, and clearly not interested in negotiation. The canyon just became a trap for everyone inside it. For a moment, nobody moves inside the canyon. The air feels tighter somehow, as if the narrow stone walls themselves are holding their breath. The two bank robbers sit frozen on their horses at the far end of the ravine, the stolen satchel pressed hard against one saddle. Behind them, the second group of riders blocks the exit like a closing gate. And you realize something immediately. This is no longer a simple pursuit. Walter whispers behind you, barely audible. That's not our posse. Frank Dalton shifts slightly beside a rock, eyes narrowing. No, he says quietly. That's not anybody I recognize. Amos Crowley stays crouched low, watching both sides with steady focus. "Could be bounty riders," he murmurs. Cole swallows hard. Or worse. Nobody asks what worse means. Frontier life supplies too many answers already. The robbers glance back and forth rapidly now, trapped between two groups. One group led by you, still partially hidden near the canyon bend. The other fully visible, blocking their escape route. A man from the second group raises his voice. "Hand over the satchel." His tone is sharp, organized, not panicked. These are not townspeople, not ranchers. Something more deliberate. Frank mutters under his breath. "Professional hunters. You keep your eyes fixed ahead." Bounty men are a growing reality in the Western Territories during this period. As railroads and telegraphs expand, so does the informal industry of tracking fugitives for reward money. Some are former lawmen, some are ex-soldiers, some are simply men skilled at following trails and willing to accept violent work. Their methods are often efficient and rarely gentle. The robbers hesitate. One of them shouts back, "We didn't take your money." A lie, perhaps, or truth buried inside confusion. It doesn't matter to the men blocking the canyon exit. Last chance, the bounty leader calls. The canyon becomes very still again. Even the wind seems to stop for a moment. Then suddenly, one of the robbers kicks his horse forward desperately toward the side of the ravine instead of the exit. A mistake. A breaking point. Everything happens at once. Gunfire erupts from the bounty riders. The canyon explodes with sound. Echoes multiply violently against stone walls, turning each shot into dozens of overlapping cracks. Horses rear, dust and gravel fly into the air. One of the robbers drops his satchel as his horse stumbles sideways. Now Frank shouts, "You move immediately." Years of frontier stories always suggest gunfights are dramatic. Slow-motion affairs with perfect aim and clear heroism. Reality is far more chaotic. Noise, confusion, movement everywhere at once. You fire once toward the bounty riders just to break their formation, not aiming for anything precise. The shot echoes violently through the canyon. Walter curses loudly behind you. "Never again," he yells, though nobody is listening. Amos Crowley rises smoothly from cover and fires twice with controlled rhythm toward the bounty group's flank. Not reckless, not emotional, efficient. Cole follows with less discipline, more urgency. The robbers try to flee downhill, but the terrain betrays them. One horse slips on loose stone, collapsing hard. The rider rolls away desperately, disappearing behind dust. The satchel lies in the open now. Frank sees it first. "Cover me!" He runs forward in a low sprint. You shout instinctively. "Frank, wait." But he is already moving. One bounty rider turns toward him, raising a rifle. You fire again, this time closer. The bounty rider stumbles backward behind a rock, momentarily losing line of sight. Frank reaches the satchel, grabbing it with one hand while still moving. Then everything shifts again. A shot comes from above, not from either group. Everyone freezes for a fraction of a second. The sound echoes differently. Higher, sharper. Someone positioned on the canyon ridge. Amos looks up instantly. "Sniper," he says flatly. The word changes the entire situation. Frank ducks hard as dirt explodes near his feet. The robbers, the bounty men, and your group all suddenly realize the same truth. There is a third force here, someone watching this entire conflict unfold from above. Walter looks pale. "This just keeps getting better," he mutters. Another shot cracks down from the ridge. This one hits a rock near Cole, sending fragments flying. Cole shouts and dives for cover. The canyon is now pure chaos. No clear sides, no clear rules, just survival. Amos Crowley grabs your arm briefly. We leave. He says, "Which way?" He points toward a narrow side fissure in the rock wall. Through there, before whoever's up top decides we're all targets. Frank reappears beside you, breathing hard, satchel still in hand. "Got it," he says. "Then move. You order." You signal the group. Retreat. Not victory. Not capture. Just survival. You push through the narrow side passage with the others as gunfire continues echoing behind you. Rocks crack. Horses scream. Dust fills the air thick enough to taste. As you enter the tighter passage, the canyon battle fades behind stone walls, becoming distant and distorted. Walter stumbles beside you. "I thought being sheriff meant paperwork," he says breathlessly. "You thought wrong," you reply. The passage opens slightly ahead into a hidden slope descending away from the canyon entirely. Frank looks at you. What now? You glance back once toward the chaos behind. Robbers, bounty men, unknown sniper above. None of it resolved, nothing finished. Just violence continuing in layers. We regroup. You say finally, then we figure out who else is involved. Amos gives a small nod. "For what it's worth," he says quietly, "this was not a normal robbery." "No, you agree. It wasn't." Behind you, the canyon still echoes with distant gunfire as you disappear down the hidden slope into uncertain terrain. And the frontier, as always, refuses to reveal which side it is truly on. The hidden slope carries you away from the canyon like a slow escape from a nightmare. You are still half inside. Loose stones shift underfoot as you descend, rolling ahead of your boots and disappearing into brush below. The sound of gunfire fades quickly behind the rock walls, replaced by wind and the distant rustle of grass. Only when the canyon is fully out of sight do you realize how hard you are breathing. Walter is the first to speak. "I'm beginning to think every direction in this territory leads to someone trying to kill us." Frank Dalton walks a few steps ahead, still holding the satchel. "That's an exaggeration," he says calmly. Walter stares at him. "Is it?" Frank does not answer immediately. Amos Crowley scans the terrain below the slope. "It's quiet," he says instead. Cole spits into the dirt. "Quiet is what worries me." That earns a brief glance from Amos. Good instinct. You reach level ground at last, a patchwork of scrub and uneven rock stretching toward distant hills. From here, the canyon is hidden completely, swallowed by land folds and shadowed ridges. No more gunfire is audible now, just wind and the uneasy sense that something larger is still unfolding out of sight. Frank finally lowers the satchel to the ground. Everyone watches it. The payroll bag, still intact, still heavy. Walter crouches slightly. "So, we just found it?" "Not exactly," Frank replies. "We survived long enough to still have it." Amos looks toward the canyon line. "The question is, who else knows we have it now?" That thought settles heavily. In frontier conflicts, possession is rarely final. What matters is who can enforce possession afterward. A stolen payroll is not just money. It is leverage. It is motive. It is invitation. You kneel beside the satchel. "Open it!" Frank hesitates briefly, then unlaces the top carefully. Inside are bundled notes and coin rolls, damp at the edges from rain and rough handling, but still intact. Walter exhales sharply. "That's a lot of trouble in one bag." Cole glances nervously around. "We can't carry this back through open land." "Not after that canyon." Amos nods once, He's right. Whoever was on that ridge will be tracking us now. Frank straightens slowly. So we move fast? You look at him. Where? Amos answers before Frank can. Old supply trail east of here. Abandoned mining route. Fewer crossings. Walter groans quietly. Of course there's an abandoned mining route. There's always an abandoned mining route, Amos says. That is unfortunately accurate for this era. The frontier is filled with abandoned dreams, mining camps that collapsed, boom towns erased by depleted veins, trails that once carried wealth now lead only to silence. You stand again. We don't stay here. You decide. Frank secures the satchel to his saddle again. Agreed. The group mounts up quickly, tension still tight in every movement. No one fully relaxes, not after the canyon, not after the sniper. You ride east. The land changes subtly again as you move. Rock gives way to uneven scrubland, then to scattered stands of dry brush bending in the wind. The horizon feels closer here, as if the world is narrowing around you. After about an hour, Walter breaks the silence. Do you think the bank robbery was even the main event? You glance at him. What do you mean? Walter adjusts his hat. Too many groups, too much coordination. Robbers, bounty men, that ridge shooter. Frank listens without turning. Amos speaks quietly. He's thinking correctly. Cole frowns, meaning Amos finally looks at all of you, meaning this wasn't just a robbery, it was a convergence. The word sits oddly in the air. Frank shakes his head slightly. That sounds dramatic. Amos shrugs. Truth often does. You consider this carefully. Explain. Amos slows his horse slightly. 3 possibilities. Robbers acting alone and getting unlucky. Bounty hunters following separate intelligence. And a third force watching both. Walter looks uncomfortable. And the sniper. Amos nods. Exactly. Frank finally speaks. You suggesting someone orchestrated all of it? I'm suggesting, Amos replies calmly, someone knew more than they should. The prairie stretches ahead endlessly. Wind pushes grass in rolling waves across open land. The sky feels enormous again, but less comforting than before. Every distant rise could hide watchers. Every shadow could mean movement. After another stretch of riding, you spot something ahead. A structure, half collapsed. Old mining camp remnants. Wooden frames leaning like broken ribs against the hillside. A rusted wagon wheel half buried in dirt. A few scattered beams where buildings once stood. Walter points. Rest, stop. Maybe, you say. Frank slows. Or a trap. Amos studies the ruins carefully. No smoke, no recent tracks. Cole scans the ground. Could still be used. You decide carefully. We check it. The group dismounts near the edge of the abandoned camp. Silence surrounds you again. Heavier here, as though the land itself remembers voices that once lived in this place. You step into the ruins cautiously. The wooden structures creak faintly in the wind. Inside one collapsed building, you find old tools scattered across dirt, rusted picks, broken lantern glass, a ledger book soaked and unreadable, a forgotten life. Walter kicks at a piece of timber. How many towns like this out here? Frank answers quietly. More than people remember. Amos pauses near what might have been an office. Something's off, he says suddenly. You turn. What? He crouches, pointing at the ground. Footprints. Fresh? Not many, but recent enough to matter. Cole tightens his grip on his rifle. They're here. Amos studies the direction. No, He looks up toward the hills beyond the camp. They passed through. Frank narrows his eyes. The robbers. Amos shakes his head. Or someone following them. A cold realization settles over the group. This abandoned camp is not empty history. It is a waypoint. You stand slowly, and then you hear it. A distant horse whistle. Not wind. Not animal. Human. Somewhere beyond the ruins. Someone is signaling, and they already know exactly where you are. The horse whistle cuts through the abandoned mining camp like a signal that does not belong to nature. It is soft at first, almost casual, then repeated once more, sharper, closer, as if someone is confirming your exact position rather than searching for it. Walter stiffens immediately. I don't like that sound. Frank Dalton has already shifted his rifle into a ready position. Neither do I. Amos Crowley remains still for a moment longer, listening carefully. 2 riders, he says finally. Maybe 3. Cole scans the ridgeline. Where? Amos tilts his head slightly toward the northern slope beyond the ruined camp. Upwind. They're using elevation to mask movement. That detail matters more than it should. Experienced trackers understand terrain not as scenery, but as cover, concealment, and advantage. Whoever is signaling knows exactly how to use the land. You move slowly toward a collapsed wooden wall, staying low. The mining camp suddenly feels less abandoned, more paused, like something left mid-sentence. A gust of wind pushes through broken beams, making the entire structure groan softly. Dust lifts in thin spirals across the ground, revealing more footprints than you initially noticed. Frank crouches beside them. Multiple passes, he murmurs. Recent. Walter swallows. So this place is used. Amos nods once. Yes. Cole tightens his jaw. By who? No answer comes immediately, because there is no obvious answer. Frontier territories during this period are full of overlapping groups, outlaws, bounty hunters, railroad agents, cattle interests, sometimes even private security hired quietly by banks or mining companies. Lines between law and crime are not always visible from the ground level. You look toward the broken mine shaft entrance at the edge of camp. Darkness spills from it like a wound in the hillside. Something about it feels wrong. Not structurally, not physically, just recently used. You gesture quietly. Check the shaft. Frank shakes his head slightly. Too exposed. Amos agrees. If they're watching us, that's where they expect us to go. Walter points nervously toward the ridge. Then what are they waiting for? Almost immediately, the answer comes. A gunshot cracks from above. Dust explodes near the collapsed wall beside you. Everyone dives instantly. The second shot follows less than a breath later, hitting a wooden beam that splinters violently. Cole fires upward in return without hesitation. Frank shouts. Don't waste shots. But it is too late for restraint. The ridge above becomes active now. Shapes appear briefly between rocks. Not many, maybe 2 shooters, possibly more repositioning behind them. Amos pulls you down behind a broken wagon frame. We're being herded, he says calmly. What? He nods toward the mine entrance. They want us inside. Walter laughs once, humorless. That's insane. Not uncommon, Amos replies. Frank fires once toward the ridge, then ducks back. You think this is about the payroll, he asks? Amos pauses. Payroll is part of it. Cole peers upward again. Then what's the rest? No one answers immediately. Because the obvious implication is worse than the robbery itself. You glance toward the mine entrance again. Dark. Silent. Waiting? If the shooters above want you inside, the mine is not shelter. It is containment. Frank suddenly stands. "We don't go in there." A shot immediately slams into the ground near his boots, forcing him back down. Walter curses. That's a very persuasive argument. Amos studies the ridge carefully. "They're not trying to kill us yet," he says quietly. Frank looks at him sharply. "Yet." Amos nods. "They're controlling movement. You understand it now? Not random attack, guided pressure. The shooters are driving you somewhere specific. The mine." Cole grits his teeth. "So we're just supposed to walk into it." Amos meets his eyes. "No, we choose how." Another shot cracks overhead. Closer this time. Splinters rain down. You make a decision quickly. We split attention. Frank looks at you. "Explain." You point toward the ridge. Frank and Cole return fire. "Keep them pinned." Then toward Amos. You and I circle toward the side slope. We find who's signaling. Walter immediately shakes his head. "I'm not splitting from anyone." "You're with Frank?" You say. Walter looks offended. "That sounds like the most dangerous option." Frank nods slightly. "I'll try not to die." Walter does not look reassured. Still, there is no time for debate. Another shot snaps through the air. Movement begins immediately. Frank and Cole climb to partial cover behind fallen beams, firing upward in controlled bursts. The ridge shooters respond, but their angles are now limited. You move with Amos along the side of the camp, keeping low behind broken structures and mining debris. Wind carries gunpowder smell faintly now. The terrain slopes upward along the edge of the camp, offering partial concealment. Amos stops suddenly and points. There, a figure, half hidden behind rock outcropping, watching the ridge. Not firing, signaling. A mirror flash catches sunlight briefly. Heliograph, or polished metal. Communication. Amos crouches lower. "That's our conductor," he murmurs. You study the figure carefully. Not a shooter, observer. Coordinator, the one directing movement. Walter's voice echoes faintly behind you. "Sheriff, Frank's position is still holding, but pressure is increasing." The ridge shooters are adjusting positions. You realize the timing now? This is coordinated containment. Ridge shooters force retreat. Observer directs flow. Mine waits as endpoint. Amos glances at you. "We stop him," he says. You nod. Silently, you move together through the brush, closing distance carefully. The observer does not notice at first, too focused on ridge coordination. Then Amos picks up a small stone. He throws it deliberately to the side. The observer turns. Too late. You are already moving. The moment stretches strangely. Wind, dust, distant gunfire. Then Amos lunges. The observer tries to draw a weapon. You reach him first. He stumbles backward into the rocks as Amos disarms him cleanly. The metal signaling device falls to the ground. A mirror. Polished. Simple. Deadly in its implication. The ridge gunfire suddenly shifts in confusion. Coordination breaks. Frank's voice carries faintly. They're pulling back. Cole shouts something you cannot hear clearly. Walter simply laughs in disbelief. Amos holds the captured observer by the collar. The man looks up at you calmly. Not afraid? That is the most disturbing part. You're late, he says quietly. Before anyone can respond, a deep rumbling sound comes from the direction of the mine. Not gunfire, not horses, something heavier, something structural. Like movement inside the earth itself. Amos tightens his grip. What did you set up, he demands. The man finally smiles slightly. Sequence, he says. Then, from the mine entrance far below the camp, lantern light begins to appear, one by one, coming from inside the darkness. Approaching, The lantern light inside the mine does not move like ordinary human light. It pulses, slow, controlled, almost rhythmic, as if whoever carries it is walking in formation rather than wandering blindly through tunnels. From your position above the collapsed mining camp, the glow rises gradually out of the mine entrance and spills into the open air like something being released rather than arriving. Walter's voice comes faintly from behind the broken structures. That is not comforting in any language. Frank Dalton has stopped firing now. Even the ridge shooters have gone quiet, their positions uncertain after the signal network collapsed. But silence does not feel like relief. It feels like transition. Amos still holds the captured observer by the collar. The man remains calm, too calm, watching the mine entrance as if waiting for a scheduled event. You step closer to him. Who is down there? The man tilts his head slightly. Depends who you are. Amos tightens his grip. That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters. Cole spits into the dirt. I don't like him. The observer finally looks at Cole. That is understandable. Another lantern appears inside the mine mouth. Then another. The pattern becomes clearer now. Not a group stumbling through darkness. A line. A procession. Frank calls out from his position. They're moving toward us. No one corrects him. Because it is obvious. Walter shifts uneasily. We should leave. Right now. Immediately. Preferably yesterday. You cannot disagree. But the terrain disagrees more strongly. The ridge still holds unknown shooters, even if disorganized now. The camp offers limited cover. The mine represents unknown depth. Every option carries risk. The lantern procession reaches the mine entrance fully now. Figures emerge, not rushing, not attacking, walking steadily in pairs. Dust clings to their coats. Faces remain partially obscured beneath hats and hoods. They carry rifles, slung low, not raised. Their movement is disciplined in a way that feels wrong for miners or outlaws. Frank mutters. That looks military. Amos nods once. Yes. Walter's voice cracks slightly. Everything looks military to you people. One of the figures at the front stops, just outside the mine entrance. Raises a hand. The procession behind him halts instantly. Perfect synchronization? That detail changes the air. This is not a gang, not even a typical bounty group. This is structured, organized. The leader steps forward into full daylight. Tall, straight posture, clean coat despite the mine. He looks directly at you. Even from this distance, you feel it. Recognition. Not personal, strategic, as if you are a variable already calculated. Amos releases the captured observer slightly. Who is that, you ask quietly? The observer finally speaks again. Coordinator, he says. That's not a name. No, he replies. It is a function. The word lands heavily. Frank raises his rifle slightly again. Sheriff, he calls. This is getting worse by the minute. You do not answer, because the man at the mine entrance lifts his voice, not shouting, projecting, controlled. Sheriff of this jurisdiction, he says calmly, you are currently obstructing federal recovery operations. Walter stares. Federal, Cole whispers. That's new. Amos narrows his eyes. Federal does not move like that. The man continues. You are interfering with retrieval of stolen government payroll assets. Frank mutters. That payroll is getting very complicated. The leader steps forward another pace. Return the satchel. Silence follows. The canyon gunfight. The robbers. The bounty men. The sniper. The observer. And now this organized group from the mine all converge into one impossible situation. You step forward slightly. Identify yourself. The man pauses, then answers, Special Recovery Division. Walter laughs once sharply. I'm sorry. What? The man does not react. Amos leans closer to you. This is not standard law enforcement, he murmurs. Frank keeps his rifle steady. No kidding? The leader gestures slightly. We are authorized to retrieve misallocated federal funds without delay. Cole shakes his head. That is not a sentence a normal human says. The leader looks at him briefly. It is a necessary one. Behind him, the mining procession remains perfectly still, waiting. You realize something unsettling. They are not reacting to you. They are waiting for instruction. Not from their leader, from something else. Amos suddenly speaks. This is why the canyon was a trap. The observer beside him nods slightly. Yes, Walter looks between them. I hate when you two understand things at the same time. Frank lowers his rifle just slightly. So what happens now? The leader answers immediately. Compliance or removal? Simple, clean, terrifying. A gust of wind passes through the abandoned camp, rattling loose wood and dust. The mine entrance behind them darkens briefly as lantern light adjusts position deeper inside. You notice something else now. The ridge shooters are gone. Completely. No retreat sounds, no movement, just absence. Which means they were never the main force either. Amos looks at you quietly. We are surrounded by structure, he says. Walter exhales sharply. That is the worst kind of surrounded. Frank steps slightly closer to you. We are outmatched, he says simply. Not fear. Assessment. You look at the satchel still tied to Frank's saddle, then toward the leader at the mine entrance, then toward the procession behind him, and finally toward the empty ridgeline. Everything has been converging. Not randomly, not chaotically, but deliberately, like pieces placed into position long before you arrived. You speak finally. This isn't about robbery anymore. The leader tilts his head slightly. It never was. A long silence follows. Then Amos Crowley says something very quietly. Then what is it about? The leader answers without hesitation. Control of movement corridors across the territory. Walter blinks. I understood none of that. Frank slowly exhales. Trade routes. The leader nods once. Exactly. The prairie wind rises again, colder now, and the lantern procession begins to move forward out of the mine entrance, toward you. The lantern procession advances from the mine, like a slow tide of controlled light spilling into the abandoned camp. Step by step, even spacing, no rush, no hesitation. It is the kind of movement that does not belong to ordinary men, not miners, not bounty hunters, not outlaws chasing chaos. This is something far more unsettling in its precision. Order. Walter's voice drops to a whisper beside you. I preferred it when things were just trying to shoot us. Frank Dalton shifts his stance slightly, eyes locked on the advancing figures. That can still be arranged, he mutters. Amos Crowley does not take his gaze off the leader. Don't, Amos says quietly. Not yet. Cole adjusts his grip on his rifle. Feels like we're waiting to be judged. That observation lands uncomfortably close to the truth. The leader of the procession stops again at the edge of the mining camp. Lantern light frames him from behind, turning his silhouette into something almost unreal against the dusty air. He speaks calmly. Sheriff, you are standing in a restricted corridor of federal transit infrastructure. Walter lets out a short laugh. I'm sorry. Did he just call a canyon a hallway? Frank does not look amused. Amos answers quietly. Yes. The leader continues. This region has been designated for secure movement of high-value assets. Your interference is delaying authorized recovery. You step forward slightly. Authorized by who? A pause. A deliberate one. Contractual authority. That word again. Not government. Not law. Contract. Amos exhales slowly. This is private enforcement. He says. Frank finally looks at him. You sure? Amos nods once. I have seen this pattern before. After the war, rail companies, mining syndicates, they hire structured units to control territory without official jurisdiction. Walter shakes his head. So basically, legal outlaws. Something like that. Amos replies. The leader's gaze shifts to Frank's saddle. The satchel. Return the asset. Frank does not move. Or the leader does not hesitate. Or removal continues. Cole mutters under his breath. Still hate that word. The tension tightens again. You realize something important now. This is not a negotiation in the usual sense. Not a standoff where pride or fear might shift the outcome. This is procedural, predefined. The leader is following a framework that does not care about persuasion. Only compliance. Amos suddenly steps forward slightly. You are operating without territorial sheriff sanction, he says calmly. The leader looks at him. That jurisdiction is irrelevant. Frank narrows his eyes. That's not how law works. The leader's expression remains unchanged. That is how infrastructure works. Walter leans toward you. I don't like infrastructure people. They always sound like they're winning. The lanterns behind the leader shift slightly as the procession tightens formation. You notice something else now. They are not surrounding you yet. They are shaping space, directing movement, just like before. The canyon was not the trap. The camp is not the trap either. They are mapping behavior. Frank tightens his grip on the satchel. You want this? He calls out. The leader nods once. Yes? Frank pauses, then suddenly tosses the satchel toward you. You catch it instinctively. Walter flinches. Frank speaks without looking away from the procession. I'm not dying for payroll. I didn't steal. Interesting shift. The leader watches the exchange carefully. Amos glances at Frank. Smart, he murmurs. Frank shrugs slightly. Practical. The leader steps forward again. Asset secured, he says. Then something unexpected happens. The lanterns behind him begin to dim. Not physically, but spacing changes. The formation relaxes. Amos notices immediately. That's not withdrawal, he says. Cole frowns. What is it then? Amos answers quietly. Reassessment. The leader tilts his head slightly. Unexpected resistance vector, he says. Walter stares at him. I hate when he talks like that. You grip the satchel tighter. This is just money, you say firmly. The leader looks at you directly. No, he replies. It is movement data. Silence. Frank finally speaks. Movement data. Amos closes his eyes briefly. Oh no. The leader continues. Payroll distribution patterns across rail-adjacent towns determine migration, settlement density, and transport viability. This is not currency retrieval. It is predictive modeling. Walter slowly turns toward you. I miss saloon fights. Cole whispers. So this is about mapping people. The leader nods. Correct. Amos looks toward the ridgeline, then the canyon behind. This entire region has been turned into a controlled experiment. The leader does not deny it. Instead, he says something worse. You are all variables. A cold silence follows. Even the wind feels quieter. Frank shifts his rifle again. So what happens to the variables, he asks. The leader answers without emotion. Reassignment, Walter whispers. That sounds like kidnapping with better vocabulary. You step forward slightly. You're not taking anyone. The leader studies you again. There is no taking, he says, only adjustment of flow. Amos suddenly turns to you. "We need to leave," he says quietly. "Now." "Yes." "For where?" Amos looks toward the east. "Anywhere outside mapped corridors." Frank shakes his head. "That sounds impossible." Amos replies, "Infrastructure systems rely on predictable movement. Unpredictable movement breaks them." Cole nods slowly. "That's the first thing I've heard all day that makes sense." The leader raises a hand slightly. Behind him, the procession adjusts again. Lanterns tightening, not attacking, preparing. You realize what is about to happen. Containment field closing. Walter steps closer to you. "Sheriff," he whispers, "I think they're about to reorganize us again." You tighten your grip on the satchel and make your decision. "Then we stop being predictable." Frank looks at you. Amos nods once. Cole grips his reins. Walter sighs. "Oh, good. I hate predictable, too." The wind shifts across the abandoned mining camp, and for the first time since this began, you do not prepare to defend position. You prepare to break it. The decision to stop being predictable does not feel heroic. It feels like stepping off a map that everyone else is still reading. For a brief moment, nobody moves. The lantern procession remains arranged in precise formation at the edge of the abandoned camp. Their light steady, controlled, patient. The leader watches without urgency, as if time itself is something he has scheduled. Behind you, Frank Dalton adjusts his grip on the reins. Amos Crowley exhales slowly. Walter looks at all of you like he is waiting for someone else to suggest a better universe. Cole breaks the silence first. "So what does unpredictable look like exactly?" Frank answers without looking at him. "Moving before they finish thinking." Amos nods once. "Yes." You glance at the satchel still in your hand. It suddenly feels less like money and more like bait. The leader speaks again from the front of the formation. "Non-compliant movement detected," Walter mutters immediately. "That is the worst poetry I have ever heard." The lanterns behind him tighten slightly. Not forward, not yet, just narrowing space. Amos steps closer to you. "We do not engage their formation," he says quietly. "We deny their geometry." Frank raises an eyebrow. "That sounded made up." "It's not." The leader lifts one hand. The procession behind him shifts again in perfect synchronization. You feel it now. Pressure. Not physical, directional. Like the land itself is being encouraged to funnel you somewhere specific again. Walter suddenly looks toward the mine. "They're still herding us," he whispers. Amos shakes his head. "Not herding?" Then what? "Modeling resistance." That phrase lands heavily. Frank finally speaks, so we break the model. Amos looks at him. "Yes." You make a quick decision. "We split." Walter immediately reacts. "I vote no on splitting." "No vote," Frank says. Cole tightens his jaw. "Where are we splitting to?" Amos points east again. 3 directions. Not 2, not clean lines. Walter groans. "I hate math metaphors in gunfights." The leader watches you carefully now. He understands something is changing, but not exactly what. You raise your voice slightly. "Now." Everything breaks at once. Frank rides hard to the left, toward the broken ridgeline. Cole follows him immediately. Walter clings on behind Frank, looking deeply regretful about every life choice that led to this exact moment. Amos moves right with you, cutting toward uneven ground that slopes away from the camp. Behind you, the lantern formation hesitates just for a fraction of a second. That hesitation is everything. The leader's voice sharpens. "Correction required?" "Too late?" You push forward fast. Hoofbeats scatter across uneven terrain. Dust rises behind you in sharp bursts. The camp falls away quickly as you descend into broken land filled with brush, stone, and sudden dips that disrupt formation tracking. Amos rides close beside you. "Do not follow straight lines," he says. "I noticed," you reply. Behind you, faint lantern glow begins to reorganize. They are recalculating. Frank's group disappears behind a ridgeline. Cole's horse stumbles briefly, then recovers. Walter shouts something unintelligible that is probably both fear and commentary. Then a new sound appears. Not gunfire, not horses. Mechanical clicking from somewhere behind the procession. Amos hears it immediately. "They've switched communication layers," he says. "What does that mean, you ask?" "It means we are no longer the primary problem." That is not reassuring. You ride harder into rougher ground. The terrain becomes unpredictable now. Rocks jut from soil at strange angles. Dry brush grabs at reins. Visibility drops in and out as hills overlap. The structured formation behind you begins to fracture, not collapsing, adapting. Frank's voice echoes faintly from the left ridge. "They're not following straight," Cole shouts back. "They're spreading." Walter yells something about unfair tactical landscaping, which is ignored by everyone. Amos suddenly pulls his horse to a stop. "You do the same?" "What?" He listens, very carefully, then points downward. "Below us." You dismount immediately. Amos follows. The ground here is uneven rock layered over hollow space. Not a cave exactly. More like an old drainage cut or forgotten tunnel system. Amos crouches. "This is older than the mining camp," he says. You kneel beside him. "Natural." He shakes his head. "No. Modified." Walter finally catches up, nearly falling off his horse. "Please tell me we are not going underground." Amos stands. "We are not." A pause. Then he adds, "They are?" You look toward the distant movement behind you. The lantern formation is spreading again, but now with intention. The leader raises his hand, and the formation begins shifting toward the ground beneath your position. Walter slowly turns pale. "I don't like where this is going." Frank's voice calls faintly from the ridge. "We're being cut off." Cole responds from above and below. Amos turns to you. "This is containment stacking," he says quietly. "That sounds worse than normal containment." "It is." The ground beneath you shifts slightly. Not collapse. Not yet. But pressure. You realize it at the same time Amos does. "They are not chasing," you say. "No," Amos replies. "They are enclosing." Walter backs away slowly. "I officially hate infrastructure people again." Frank appears briefly on the ridge above, looking down. "We need out," he shouts. Amos nods once. There is one direction left that is not modeled. You follow his gaze toward a narrow valley cutting sharply between two ridges far ahead. Unmapped terrain. Uncontrolled. Frank shouts again. "Sheriff!" You make the decision instantly. Move. The group converges again in motion, breaking formation entirely now, abandoning structure completely. Behind you, the lantern network tightens, and for the first time, the leader's calm expression shifts slightly. Not anger, not panic, recognition that something is no longer behaving correctly. The frontier wind rises again, and the system begins to fail. The valley ahead looks like the land forgot to finish itself. Two ridge lines lean toward each other without quite meeting, forming a narrow passage of broken stone, tangled brush, and shallow streams that cut through old earth like forgotten scars. The wind behaves differently here, too, slipping in uneven currents that twist and shift instead of flowing in a single direction. Amos Crowley slows his horse the moment you reach the entrance. "This is it," he says quietly. Walter leans forward in his saddle. It looks like a place where maps go to die. Frank Dalton rides up beside you, scanning the valley edges. No lanterns, he says. Cole looks back over his shoulder. But they're still coming. He is right. Far behind, the faint glow of the organized force is still visible across broken terrain. Adjusting again, not rushing, not losing control, simply recalibrating after your sudden departure from their expected movement paths. The system has not stopped. It has adapted. Amos dismounts. "You cannot outrun a structure," he says calmly. Walter groans. "Please stop saying structure." Amos continues anyway. "But you can break its assumptions." You glance at him, and this valley breaks assumptions. Amos nods once. Too irregular, too many blind angles, too much noise in terrain feedback. Frank snorts. "That sounds like a polite way of saying it's confusing." "Correct." Amos replies. You look into the valley. It is confusing. Streams cross in unpredictable directions. Rock formations block sightlines in uneven intervals. Brush grows in dense clusters, then vanishes abruptly. Even sound behaves strangely, echoing in short fragments before disappearing. If someone were tracking movement patterns here, prediction would degrade quickly. Walter dismounts reluctantly. So what now? We just hide in confusing geography and hope they get bored. Frank shakes his head. No one out there looks bored. Cole scans the ridgeline behind you. They're reforming again. You turn. The lantern network is still visible in the distance, but now it has changed shape entirely. Wider spacing. Multiple entry vectors. No longer a pursuit line. A net. Walter notices, too. That is absolutely a net, he says flatly. Amos tightens his jaw. They're adapting to unpredictability. Frank looks at you. That's bad, right? Very. Amos answers, You step forward into the valley. Then we stop being visible. They follow. The moment you enter the valley, sound changes immediately. Hoofbeats dull, wind fractures, even breathing feels quieter, as though the land itself is absorbing motion. The group spreads slightly without discussion. Frank takes left ridge. Cole stays center. Walter remains close to you, despite clearly wanting to be anywhere else in existence. Amos moves slightly ahead. Stay irregular, he calls softly. Walter mutters, I am already irregular emotionally. The valley deepens. The terrain forces constant adjustment. Horses pick careful paths between stones. Streams must be crossed at uneven points. Visibility drops in and out unpredictably. And for the first time since the pursuit began, the lantern glow behind you becomes inconsistent. Flickering. Breaking. Walter notices immediately. They're losing coordination. Amos does not look back. No, he says, they are losing signal fidelity. Frank's voice echoes faintly from the left ridge. They're splitting too wide. Cole responds, they can't see each other anymore. That is the effect of the valley. Not escape. Disruption. Still, the leader's system does not stop. Even broken, it persists. You reach a bend where the valley narrows sharply between two rock faces. A shallow stream cuts through the center, forcing slower movement. Amos stops suddenly. Here! You dismount. Frank arrives seconds later from the ridge above. Cole follows shortly after. Walter nearly falls again, but manages to stay upright this time. Frank looks around. This is a dead end, he says. Amos shakes his head. No. He points upward. The valley walls here rise unevenly, forming overlapping ledges and fractured stone shelves. Vertical escape options. Walter stares. You want us climbing cliffs now? Amos replies simply, "It is harder to model vertical unpredictability." That phrase again, model, Walter looks at you. "I miss simple criminals," before anyone can respond. A distant sound rolls into the valley. Not lantern movement, not hoofbeats, something heavier, mechanical. Frank tightens immediately. "They've found us again." Cole looks up sharply. "No, listen. The sound is not above, not behind, ahead, from deeper inside the valley." Amos goes still. "That is not the containment force," he says. Walter swallows. "Then what is it?" No one answers immediately, because the valley itself begins to change. Dust shifts along the ground in subtle patterns. Brush bends slightly, as if disturbed by movement that is not yet visible. Then a shape appears ahead through the narrowing passage. Large, metallic, mounted on wheels, a rail cart, old mining equipment, repurposed, and behind it, figures walking in coordinated lines again. Not lantern carriers, not bounty men, something else, Amos whispers. "They are not correcting us anymore." Frank raises his rifle slowly. "Then what are they doing?" Amos meets your eyes. "They are converging." Walter exhales. "That sounds like the final boss version of everything." The rail cart rolls forward slightly, and the figures behind it begin to fan out into the valley. Not blocking exits, not pushing. Positioning. You realize the truth a second later. The valley was never escape. It was funnel, and now the system has caught up to you here too. Frank steps closer to you. "So what's the plan now?" "Sheriff." You look at the narrowing valley behind and ahead, then at Amos, then at Walter, Cole, and Frank, and finally at the approaching structured force. You answer quietly. "We stop running from the system." A pause. "Then we interrupt it." Amos nods once. "Good," he says. "That is finally a correct variable choice." The rail cart creaks closer, and the valley fills with light that is not natural. The rail cart creaks closer into the valley, like something dragged out of the earth's memory rather than built by human hands. Its wheels grind against uneven stone tracks, half buried beneath dust and weeds, producing a steady but deliberate rhythm that feels almost patient. Lantern light and mechanical glow mix together in a pale, clinical shimmer that does not belong to open wilderness. Walter stares at it for a long moment. "I've decided I hate mining camps, rail carts, and anything that moves without a horse," he says quietly. Frank keeps his rifle raised but does not fire yet. "Not a normal freight cart," he mutters. Amos Crowley studies it carefully. "No," he agrees, "that is a mobile coordination unit." Cole squints. "A what?" Amos answers, without taking his eyes off the approaching machine. "A field command platform. They are projecting control from it." You step slightly forward, boots pressing into damp stone near the stream, cutting through the valley floor. The rail cart stops, perfectly centered in the passage, as if the valley itself has been selected for observation. Then the figures behind it spread out again, forming a semicircle. Not enclosing yet, measuring. The leader appears again, now positioned beside the cart. His voice carries down the valley with unnatural clarity. "Final compliance request." Walter mutters immediately. "I think I preferred earlier requests when they were less final." The leader continues. "Asset will be transferred. All hostiles will be allowed to disperse under observation." Frank snorts. "That sounds like surrender with paperwork." Cole shifts uneasily. "They're offering us escape." Amos shakes his head. "No," he says, "they are offering controlled disappearance." That phrase lands heavily. "Controlled disappearance." The leader steps slightly forward. "Sheriff jurisdiction acknowledged." He says, "Your interference has been logged. Further resistance will escalate classification. You look at Amos. What does that mean? Amos answers quietly. They stop negotiating. Walter exhales sharply. So they're negotiating now. Amos does not respond. Because the answer is obvious. Not really. Frank lowers his rifle slightly. So what are we actually dealing with? Amos finally looks at all of you. A private territorial control system operating under infrastructure doctrine. Walter raises his hand. I'm going to need that translated into not terrifying language. Cole mutters, "They are running the land?" Silence follows. Even Frank does not immediately respond to that. The leader beside the rail cart raises his hand, and something changes in the valley. You hear it before you see it. A low, synchronized mechanical sound. Not from the cart, from above, from both ridge lines, hidden mechanisms, cables, movement. The valley begins to tighten, not physically collapsing, structurally adjusting. Walter looks up. What is happening? Amos's voice tightens slightly. They are closing vertical corridors. Frank looks sharply upward. They can do that. Amos answers. If they own the infrastructure. Cole suddenly points. Look! Above the valley edges, faint silhouettes appear. Mechanized pulleys, mounted rigs, cable systems anchored into rock, slowly shifting positions. The valley is being sealed, controlled, segmented. Walter backs up slightly. This is not normal frontier behavior, he says. Frank replies, "No kidding." The leader's voice echoes again. Final compliance window closing. Amos steps forward slightly. There is no compliance option, he says quietly. The leader tilts his head. There is always compliance. Amos shakes his head. No, there is only system or disruption. The leader pauses for a fraction of a second, then speaks again. Disruption will be contained. Frank looks at you. We're out of moves, he says. You look at the valley, at the rail cart, at the structured formation, at the cables tightening above, at Amos Crowley standing beside you, thinking rapidly. Then something changes in Amos's expression. He looks down at the stream cutting through the valley floor, then at the stone beneath it, then back at you. This valley is not just terrain, he says suddenly. Walter groans. Please don't say it's infrastructure again. Amos ignores him. It is a relay point. Cole frowns. For what? Amos answers slowly. For signal propagation between ridge systems. Frank narrows his eyes. You mean the whole valley is part of their network? Amos nods. Yes. A pause. Then Walter whispers. So we're standing inside their communication system? Amos looks at you. Yes. Silence drops heavily across the group. The leader raises his hand again. Final signal. The rail cart hum deepens. The valley begins to hum back. You feel it in your boots, in the air, in the stone. Amos suddenly looks at you sharply. If we disrupt the relay point, he says, we collapse their coordination. Walter stares at him. How do we do that? Amos looks at the stream, then at the cart, then at the ridgeline cables. Force signal contradiction. Frank exhales. That's not an answer. Amos replies simply, it is the only one. The leader begins to lower his hand. Final phase initiation. Walter whispers, I don't like final phases. You make your decision in a single breath. Now, you say, and the valley breaks into motion again. But this time, not theirs. For a brief moment after you speak, nothing outwardly changes. And yet everything inside the valley feels like it has shifted. The rail cart remains in place, its mechanical hum steady and confident. The structured force around it holds position, waiting for the final phase to complete. The cables above the valley remain taut, suspended like a system about to lock itself into permanent order. But now there is hesitation, not in movement, In response time, Walter notices it first. Something's off, he says quietly. Frank tightens his grip on the rifle again. They're slowing. Amos nods once. Signal conflict, he says. Cole looks between them. What did you do? You glance at Amos. Tell me. Amos points at the stream running through the valley floor. This is the relay spine. If we introduce irregular feedback here, their coordination layer misaligns. Walter stares at the water. It's a stream. Amos replies, it is also a conductor. Frank mutters, of course it is. The leader by the rail card raises his hand again, but the motion is not as smooth now. Slight delay, fractional hesitation. The structured units along the valley walls respond unevenly, not simultaneously, not perfectly. Walter exhales sharply. They're stuttering. Amos nods. Yes. Cole's eyes widen slightly. So it's working. Amos does not answer immediately, because now the valley begins to respond in multiple ways at once. The cables above the ridges twitch, not uniformly. Some retract slightly, others hold firm. One section releases tension too early, causing a sharp metallic snap that echoes through the canyon. The rail cart's hum fluctuates. The leader turns toward it for the first time. A microsecond of uncertainty. Frank notices immediately. That's our opening. Amos steps forward into the shallow stream. Not an opening, he says. A fracture point. Walter looks horrified. That sounds worse, Amos continues. We amplify it. The leader raises both hands now, but the synchronized force behind him does not respond cleanly. Some units advance, some hesitate, some stop entirely. Cole whispers, they're losing coordination. Frank nods. For the first time. You look at Amos. What now? Amos answers quickly. We overload the relay. Walter steps back. By doing what exactly? Amos points at the rail cart. That. The cart hums louder again, compensating for instability. But now it is compensating too much. Frank suddenly understands. You want to push conflicting signals into their control hub. Amos nods once. Yes. Cole frowns. How? Amos looks at you. Movement disruption. Walter immediately reacts. That is not helpful. Frank suddenly steps forward. I'll do it. You turn to him. No. Frank doesn't hesitate. I'm already closest. Amos studies him briefly. Probability acceptable, he says. Walter groans. I hate when he says probability. Frank begins moving before anyone can stop him, crossing the shallow stream toward the rail cart. The structured force reacts, delayed, then uneven. One group steps forward too early. Another hesitates too long. The system is breaking rhythm. Amos turns sharply to you. Now we increase variance. What does that mean? Every action must contradict expected response. Walter shakes his head. I'm too tired for philosophy. Cole suddenly fires a shot upward toward the ridge cables. The sound echoes. Immediately, the cable system reacts. Wrong. Too late. Too early. A segment releases tension unexpectedly, causing a chain reaction of misalignment along the ridge. Metal groans. The valley structure shudders. Walter stares. I think I broke infrastructure, he says quietly. Amos nods. Yes. Frank reaches the rail cart. The leader turns toward him sharply. Frank raises his rifle. Not firing, just presence. And for the first time, the leader's expression changes. Not anger, not command, confusion. Walter whispers. That is new. Amos steps into the stream fully now. Now, he says quietly, we destabilize the center. You move with him. Together, you step into the shallow water. The moment your boots touch the stream, something changes again. Not violently, systemically. The relay spine begins to reflect conflicting signals. Upstream, downstream, across the valley. The railcart hum spikes suddenly. The leader turns back toward it for the first time. Urgency enters his voice. Stabilize output. But the units around him respond out of sync. One group obeys. Another misinterprets. Another fails entirely. Frank takes advantage immediately. He fires not at people, but at the cart's external coupling mechanism. Metal sparks. The cart shudders. The valley answers. All at once, cables snap in segments. Signals fragment. Coordination collapses in waves instead of lines. Walter stares upward. They're losing control of the entire valley. Amos nods. Yes. The leader finally steps back from the rail cart, and for the first time, he looks directly at you without system confidence behind his eyes. Just observation, pure human attention. You are introducing noise, he says. Amos answers calmly. Yes. The leader pauses, then speaks softly. Then correction escalates. Frank shouts from the cart's edge. We're out of time. Cole yells. Ridge systems are collapsing. Walter backs away from the stream. I don't think we're winning this properly. Amos looks at you. This is the only way to break it. You understand now. Not victory. Disruption. The valley begins to shake in uneven patterns. Signals fail. Order breaks. The rail cart's hum rises one final time, and then fractures. Silence follows. Not peaceful, not complete, but different. The leader steps back once more, and the structured force begins to withdraw, not in retreat, but in recalibration failure. Walter exhales. Did we just win? Amos watches the collapsing system. No, he says quietly. We just removed control. Frank returns, breathing heavily. That's good enough for me. But Amos keeps staring at the valley, because somewhere beyond the broken relay system, something larger is still listening. The silence that follows is not peace. It is absence, a stripped-out quiet that feels too large for the valley, as if something essential has been removed, and the landscape is still trying to remember how to behave without it. Walter is the first to speak. So, are we dead or victorious? Frank Dalton lowers his rifle slowly. Neither, he says. We're just not being actively organized right now. Cole exhales hard. That's the most unsettling version of survival I've ever heard. Amos Crowley remains still in the shallow stream, eyes scanning the ridges. They are withdrawing, he says quietly. You look up. The structured units that had filled the valley moments ago are no longer advancing. Lantern systems are dimming. Cable tension across the ridges loosens unevenly. The railcart sits motionless now, no longer humming with controlled certainty. But nothing feels resolved. It feels paused. Walter steps cautiously toward the stream. I don't trust pauses, he mutters. Pauses are how bad things reload. Frank glances at him. That might be the smartest thing you've said all day. Amos suddenly kneels beside the water. Not finished, he says. Cole frowns. What isn't? Amos touches the surface of the stream. The relay system is broken, but the underlying network is still active. You kneel beside him, so they can rebuild it. Amos nods once. Yes. Frank looks toward the rail cart. Then we didn't stop them. No, Amos replies. We interrupted synchronization. That is all. Walter sighs deeply. I'm starting to think frontier problems don't have endings. Just pauses between disasters. That, unfortunately, feels accurate. A distant wind rolls through the valley again. This time, it carries no mechanical hum, no coordinated signal, just natural air moving through broken terrain. But even that feels temporary. Frank suddenly points toward the far ridge. Movement! Everyone turns! Far away, shapes are visible again along the upper ridgelines. Not lantern formation, not coordinated grid, smaller groups, scattered, reorganizing. Amos watches carefully. Fragment units, he says. Fallback agents. Cole grips his rifle tighter. So it's not over? Amos shakes his head. No, Walter mutters. I would like to formally request one oversituation in my lifetime. No one responds. Because Frank is already moving. We don't stay here, he says. You look at him. Agreed. Amos stands slowly. This valley is now compromised. Walter looks around. It was compromised when we arrived? Honestly. Cole starts toward the horses. We ride out before they rebuild coordination. The group moves quickly now, gathering what remains of order. Horses are brought together. The satchel is still with you. Heavier now, not from money, but from implication. As you mount, Amos speaks quietly. They will adapt. Frank nods. Of course they will. Amos continues. But they will adapt from fragmentation, not control. Walter squints. Is that good? Amos considers. It is less efficient. Frank smirks slightly. I'll take it. You ride out of the valley together, ascending the broken path toward higher ground. Behind you, the canyon system no longer feels like a weapon. It feels like something injured. Still dangerous, but no longer precise. As you crest the ridge, the landscape opens again into wide prairie. Wind spreads freely. The sky feels less oppressive now, as if the land has stopped being watched in layers. Walter looks back once. Do you think they'll come after us again? Frank answers immediately. Yes, Amos adds quietly. But differently. Cole exhales. That doesn't make me feel better. Amos nods. It shouldn't. You ride in silence for a while. The prairie stretches ahead endlessly again. But now it feels less like openness and more like uncertainty restored to normal shape. Eventually Walter speaks again. So what do we tell the town? Frank shrugs. That we stopped something. Cole shakes his head. I don't think we stopped it. Amos looks ahead. No, he says, we exposed it. That word settles in the air. Exposed, not ended, not solved. Just visible now, behind you, far back across the ridges and broken valley systems, faint remnants of structured movement begin to reappear in scattered, imperfect forms, but no longer unified, no longer absolute. And as the wind carries dust across the frontier again, you realize something quietly unsettling. Whatever you disrupted was only one layer, and the West is very large. The ride back across the prairie feels different now. Not safer, just less controlled, like the land itself has stopped agreeing to be part of someone else's system. Walter keeps glancing over his shoulder every few minutes, as if expecting the valley to rise up and follow them like a living thing. I don't like how quiet it is, he says eventually. Frank Dalton rides beside him. It's always quiet out here. No, Walter replies. It used to feel empty. This feels aware. Cole nods once. He's not wrong. Amos Crowley stays slightly ahead, scanning the horizon in slow, measured sweeps. They are re-establishing perimeter logic. He says. Walter sighs. I'm going to start charging people for sentences I don't understand. You ride in silence for a while, letting the wind wash across your face. The satchel of payroll sits secured again, though it feels less like recovered money now and more like evidence of something larger brushing against the frontier. After some time, Frank breaks the silence. So what exactly did we break back there? Amos considers for a moment. A synchronization corridor. Walter immediately groans. Of course it has a name. Amos continues. It allowed coordinated control across terrain nodes. Once disrupted, they lose regional coherence. Cole frowns. So they can't operate as one system anymore. Amos nods. Not quickly. Frank looks ahead. But they can still operate. Yes, that single word hangs heavily, Walter mutters. So we didn't stop the monster. We just broke its legs. Amos glances at him. That is not inaccurate. The prairie stretches on, but the mood is no longer tense in the same immediate way. Instead, it has shifted into something more uncertain, like walking through a place where a storm has passed, but the air still remembers how to thunder. By late afternoon, you begin seeing distant smoke on the horizon. Frank notices first. That's the town. Relief flickers briefly through Walter's face. Finally, Cole scans it carefully. Doesn't look normal. You slow slightly. He is right. The smoke is not rising evenly from chimneys or hearths. It is scattered, uneven, drifting in multiple directions as if disturbed by activity rather than daily life. Amos narrows his eyes. They are already responding. Frank tenses. To what? Amos answers quietly. To disruption. As you approach closer, the town comes into full view. And something is wrong. The streets are filled with movement. Not panic exactly. Organization. Too much of it. Men moving in structured patterns between buildings. Groups gathering at intersections. Horses positioned in deliberate spacing. Even the usual chaos of frontier towns feels arranged. Walter stares. This is not normal town behavior. Frank dismounts slightly ahead. That looks like an occupation. Cole looks uneasy. By who? No one answers immediately, because the answer becomes visible a moment later. New riders, arriving from multiple directions. Not the same force from before. Different groups, smaller units, but moving with the same unnatural coordination you saw in the valley. Amos exhales slowly. Fragmented system response, he says. Walter turns to him. In English, Amos answers. They adapted locally. Frank watches the town carefully. So we broke their network. And now each piece is acting on its own. Amos nods. Yes, Cole swears quietly under his breath. That sounds worse. It is. You ride closer cautiously. The sheriff's office comes into view. Windows intact. Door open. But something about it feels watched. Walter suddenly grips your arm. That's not our town anymore, is it? Frank answers before you can. It is. It just isn't behaving like it. Amos studies the movement in the streets. They are mapping again, he says quietly. Walter groans. I hate mapping. As you approach Main Street, townspeople begin noticing you. But their reactions are not relief, not confusion. Recognition. Too structured. Too fast. A man steps into the street ahead of you. Not a rancher. Not a miner. He looks directly at you. You are the sheriff, he says. Not a question. A designation. Frank immediately shifts his hand toward his rifle. Who are you, Frank demands. The man ignores him. You have interrupted authorized corridor stabilization, he says. Walter whispers. Oh no, they learned grammar too. Amos dismounts slowly. Which system are you representing, he asks. The man tilts his head slightly. All systems. Silence. Frank mutters. That's not helpful. The man continues. Fragmentation has been detected. Containment protocols are now distributed. Cole steps forward slightly. So what does that mean for us? The man finally looks at him. It means the territory is no longer singularly governed. Walter groans. I miss when the worst thing in town was a drunk with a chair. The man raises one hand slightly, and behind him, the structured movements in town subtly adjust again. Not chaotic, not random, still coordinated, just decentralized. Amos speaks quietly. They turned the entire frontier into independent enforcement cells. Frank looks at him. So we didn't break the system. Amos nods. We multiplied it. That lands heavily. You stand at the edge of town now, looking at familiar streets that no longer behave in familiar ways. And for the first time since this began, you realize the truth is not about one group controlling the frontier. It is about many systems learning to operate without agreement. Walter whispers. So what now? Amos looks at you. We decide whether we let them stabilize. Frank shakes his head. Or we don't. The wind moves through town again, and every shadow now feels like it has its own instruction. The town does not feel occupied. It feels reorganized. That is the most unsettling part. No visible takeover, no burning buildings, no mass panic. Instead, the familiar frontier chaos has been quietly replaced by something structured underneath it, like scaffolding built inside a living body. Walter stands beside you on the edge of Main Street, watching men move between buildings with too much coordination. I don't like when people walk like they've read the same instructions, he mutters. Frank Dalton scans the street slowly. Those aren't instructions, he says. Those are patterns. Cole tightens his grip on his reins. Same thing, isn't it? Amos Crowley steps forward slightly, eyes narrowed. No, he says. Instructions imply a single source. Patterns imply distributed agreement. Walter groans. I liked it better when language just meant words. You move forward carefully into town. The payroll satchel is still with you, but it now feels irrelevant in a way it should not. The entire system around you has shifted scale. Money is no longer the central variable. Control is. A man steps out from the sheriff's office. Not Walter, not Frank, not anyone you recognize. He wears a plain coat, no badge, no obvious weapon, but his posture is calm in a way that feels structured, not relaxed. You are the sheriff, he says. You stop. Yes, he nods slightly. Local authority designation confirmed. Walter whispers behind you. I really hate how he talks. Amos studies the man carefully. You are part of the distributed response layer, Amos says. The man turns toward him. Correct. Frank shifts slightly. So you're what? One of them now? The man answers simply. I am where coordination is required. Cole frowns. That sounds like everywhere. The man does not deny it. Silence settles for a moment. Then you speak. What happened to this town? The man looks around as if evaluating infrastructure. Stabilization protocol has been initiated. Walter exhales sharply. I'm going to start charging emotional damage per sentence. Amos steps forward. Stabilization of what? The man answers, movement unpredictability. Frank scoffs. That sounds like freedom. The man tilts his head. It is inefficiency. That word hangs in the air. Frank's expression tightens slightly. You're calling people inefficient. I am describing behavior. The man replies. Cole steps closer to you. This is getting worse again. Amos doesn't look away from the man. No, he says quietly. This is refinement. Walter looks between them. That is not comforting. The man gestures slightly toward the town. Your earlier disruption caused fragmentation. Fragmentation is now being resolved through localized coordination. Frank narrows his eyes. So every town, every group, every region, the man finishes the thought, is now self-organizing. A chill moves through the group. Walter whispers. So it spreads. The man nods. Yes. Amos closes his eyes briefly. That is what happens when centralized control fails in structured systems, he says quietly. Frank looks at him, and we caused that. Amos nods once. Yes. Cole swallows. So what have we done? Amos answers honestly. We removed a single hierarchy. The man from the sheriff's office steps slightly closer and replaced it with distributed governance. Walter groans. I feel like we accidentally invented bureaucracy. The man continues. There is no longer a single point of negotiation. Frank mutters. Great. The man looks at you directly again. You remain a variable of interest. You step forward. What does that mean? He pauses, then answers. You are capable of disrupting coordination fields. Silence follows. Frank immediately raises his rifle slightly. That sounds like a problem. The man does not react. It is a capability. Amos speaks quietly. And now, the man looks at all of you. Now you are observed. Walter blinks. Of course we are. Cole mutters. I hate being observed. The man turns slightly. Some regions will attempt to reintegrate you. Others will attempt to neutralize you. Most will simply adapt around you. Frank exhales slowly. That sounds like being hunted by paperwork. Amos looks at you. We are no longer dealing with one system, he says quietly. Walter shakes his head. So now it's multiple systems trying to be the same system, but failing differently. Amos nods. Yes. The man from the sheriff's office steps back toward the building. You may remain, he says, or depart. Both are accounted for. Walter laughs once, hollow. I miss when choices mattered. Frank looks at you. So what do we do now, Sheriff? You look down Main Street. It is still the same town, and completely different. Movement continues in quiet coordination across multiple layers. Nothing obvious, nothing loud, but everything aligned in ways that no longer feel accidental. Amos speaks softly. We decide whether to resist distributed control or live inside it. Walter immediately responds. I vote neither. Cole looks at him. That's not an option. Walter sighs. I know. I just wanted to say it out loud. Frank lowers his rifle slightly. This is bigger than a bank robbery now. Amos nods. Yes. The wind moves through town again, and this time, even the wind feels like it has been accounted for. The realization settles over the town slowly, like dust returning after a storm that never truly ended. Nothing is openly hostile. Nothing is clearly safe. That is what makes it worse. Walter stands in the middle of Main Street, looking around as if the buildings themselves might start issuing instructions. So, he says finally, we're in a town that thinks it's organized now. Frank Dalton keeps his eyes scanning rooftops. It's not thinking, he replies. It's executing. Cole shifts uneasily. That's a big difference. Amos Crowley answers immediately. Only in origin, not in outcome. Walter sighs. I'm going to need a drink that doesn't come with philosophical implications. You walk forward slowly, boots echoing faintly on damp boards. The sheriff's office door remains open. Inside, everything looks unchanged. Desk, chair, bars, papers, dust. And yet, it feels like it belongs to someone else now. A man stands inside, the same coordinator from earlier, waiting, not threatening, not inviting. Simply present. Frank stops outside the doorway. You're still here, he says. The man nods. Yes, Walter mutters. Do they ever leave? Or is that just not in their culture? The man turns slightly toward him. Movement is context-dependent. Walter stares. I regret asking. Amos steps forward. What is your designation here? The man answers calmly. Local stabilization node. Frank exhales sharply. So every town has one of you now. The man does not deny it. Yes. That single word spreads discomfort through the group. Cole looks around the room. So this is what we're living in now. Amos shakes his head slightly. No, he says this is what we've exposed. Walter frowns. I don't see the difference. Amos replies. Before, it was hidden structure. Now it is visible structure. Frank glances at him. And that helps? How? Amos looks at the coordinator. Visibility allows disruption. The coordinator tilts his head. Disruption has been catalogued. He says. Walter groans. I hate when things start speaking like ledgers. You step closer. So what happens to us? The coordinator pauses, a rare moment of delay, then answers. You are anomalies with demonstrated systemic interference capacity. Frank mutters. That sounds like a polite way of saying problem. Cole nods. Definitely problem. The coordinator continues. Anomalies are not removed by default. Walter raises an eyebrow. That's surprisingly generous. Frank looks suspicious. What's the catch? The coordinator turns slightly toward the window. Adaptation, Amos speaks quietly. They don't eliminate resistance. They incorporate it. Silence follows. Walter slowly shakes his head. I liked Rebellion more when it had clear villains. Frank looks at you. So we're part of their system now. Amos answers carefully. Not part, registered deviation, Cole mutters. That sounds worse. Outside, the town continues its structured movement. Not panicked, not chaotic, just subtly reorganized behavior flowing through streets like water finding new channels. A group of men passes in coordinated spacing. A wagon moves with unusual precision through an intersection. Even conversations seem to occur in measured intervals. Walter watches all of it. This feels like the world is trying to behave better without asking anyone. Amos nods once. Yes. Frank leans slightly on the door frame. I don't like better if nobody agreed to it. The coordinator responds. Agreement is not required for stability. That line sits heavily in the room. Cole looks at you. So what now, Sheriff? You glance around the office, at the same walls you've stood in before, now subtly different. Not physically, functionally. You realize something slowly. This isn't occupation. This isn't chaos either. It is optimization, and you are inside it. Amos speaks quietly. We have 3 options. Walter immediately replies, I vote for the 4th option, where none of this happened. Amos ignores him. Integrate, resist, or fragment further. Frank looks at him sharply. Fragment again. Amos nods. Break coherence further. Force more decentralization. Walter groans. So we just keep breaking things until reality gives up. Amos answers, that is one strategy. The coordinator watches silently. Cole shakes his head. This is insane. Frank looks at you again. You deciding this. You stand still for a long moment. Outside, the structured town continues moving in quiet, coordinated rhythm. Inside, everything feels like it is waiting for instruction. Amos speaks softly. Whatever you choose, it will propagate. Walter mutters, no pressure. Frank exhales slowly. Sheriff, you look at the badge on your coat. Still the same medal, still the same job title, and yet nothing about it feels familiar anymore. You speak finally. We don't integrate. A pause. Walter blinks. We don't. You shake your head. And we don't fully fragment either. Amos studies you. Then what? You look out the window. At least not on their terms. Frank nods slowly. That I can work with. The coordinator tilts his head slightly. Unclassified response, he says. Walter sighs. Of course it is. Amos steps forward. Then we continue as unresolved variables. Frank smirks faintly. Best job description I've had. Outside, the town continues its structured rhythm. But somewhere beyond it, faint irregularities begin to appear again. Not collapse, not order, something in between. And for the first time, the system does not immediately correct it. The phrase unresolved variables lingers in the sheriff's office like smoke that refuses to leave. Walter is the first to break the silence. I don't like being categorized by mathematics, he says. It feels disrespectful. Frank Dalton gives a faint shrug. I've been called worse things by men who were less organized. Cole stands near the window, watching the street outside. It's changing again, he says quietly. You move beside him. At first, nothing obvious appears different. The same wagons move. The same men walk in measured patterns. The same subtle coordination holds the town together. But then you notice it. Small inconsistencies. A man pauses too long at an intersection before choosing a direction. A wagon halts briefly, then corrects itself. A group of riders momentarily overlaps paths before splitting apart again without clear synchronization. Amos Crowley watches closely. They are losing precision, he says. Walter exhales. So your system is glitching? Amos nods once. Yes. Frank leans forward slightly. That's what we wanted, right? Amos does not answer immediately, because the answer is not simple. You step out of the sheriff's office. The air feels different now. Less controlled. Not free. Just less aligned. A man across the street notices you and pauses. For a moment, he seems uncertain which direction to continue walking. Then he resumes, but slightly off pattern. Walter follows you outside. I don't like how everyone looks like they're thinking too hard, he mutters. Frank joins you on the boardwalk. Or not thinking at all, he says. Cole looks around uneasily. It feels like the town forgot what it was doing for a second. Amos nods. That is closer to correct. The coordinator remains inside the sheriff's office, visible through the open door. He does not intervene, does not adjust. He simply observes, as if waiting for something to resolve itself. Walter points toward the far end of Main Street. That wagon just stopped for no reason. You watch. He is right. A supply wagon halts mid-street. The driver looks confused, glances around, then continues slowly, but now in a different rhythm. Frank squints. That's not random. Amos answers. No, that is adaptation under reduced coherence. Walter groans. I hate that sentence. Cole suddenly points toward the ridge beyond town. Look, far in the distance, faint movement appears again. Not structured formation, not clean lines. Something looser. Scattered riders. Frank narrows his eyes. New group. Amos studies them. Or old group reconfigured. Walter exhales. So we broke one system, and now we're getting smaller versions of it everywhere. Amos nods. Yes, that realization hangs heavy. Not collapse, replication. Frank mutters. So it spreads like confusion. Amos corrects him quietly. Like autonomy under constraint loss. Walter shakes his head. That's just confusion with extra steps. A faint tension returns to the street. Not the structured pressure from before. Something less defined. More human. More unstable. A man near the general store suddenly stops and turns around twice, as if unsure of direction. Another bumps into him, both apologizing at once before continuing in slightly misaligned paths. Cole watches carefully. It's getting worse, Frank replies, or more real. Amos looks at you. This is what decentralization without equilibrium looks like, he says. Walter raises an eyebrow. Equilibrium sounds nice. Amos nods. It is also fragile. The coordinator finally steps out of the sheriff's office again. For the first time, his expression is not neutral. It is assessing. System drift detected, he says. Walter immediately responds, I feel like I should be offended by that. The coordinator continues. Correction protocols are not stabilizing. Frank looks at him sharply. So what now? The coordinator pauses. Escalation hierarchy pending authorization. That word again. Authorization. Cole mutters. That never sounds good. Amos turns slightly toward the group. They are deciding whether to reassert control or let fragmentation continue. Walter groans. So we're in a vote we didn't sign up for. You look out over the town again. The patterns are clearly breaking now. Not collapsing, not stabilizing, drifting. Frank speaks quietly. This is still our town, he says. Amos replies. Yes, Walter adds. But it's not behaving like it remembers that. A long silence follows. Then the coordinator speaks again. Anomalous influence persists. All eyes turn toward you. Frank notices first. Oh no! Walter slowly looks at you. Why are they always looking at you when things go wrong? You don't answer immediately because you realize something uncomfortable. The disruption didn't stay in the valley. It followed you. Or maybe it started following you long before that. Amos steps closer. You are still acting as a variable anchor, he says quietly. Walter groans. I hate being near important people. Frank looks at you. So what does that make you? You look at the street again. At the town trying to behave in patterns it can no longer fully maintain. At the scattered riders on the horizon. At the coordinator waiting for resolution. You answer slowly. Still the sheriff. A pause. Then, just not in a town that agrees on what that means anymore. The wind moves through Main Street again, and for the first time, nothing corrects it immediately. The wind moves through town differently now, like it has forgotten the rule book it was once following. Dust lifts from the street in uneven spirals. A hanging sign outside the general store swings twice, pauses, then swings a third time in the wrong rhythm. Somewhere down Main Street, a horse simply refuses to move for several seconds, as if it is reconsidering the entire concept of direction. Walter watches it all with growing unease. I don't like when reality starts hesitating, he says. Frank Dalton remains still beside him. It's not hesitation, he replies. It's loss of coordination. Cole looks toward the horizon again. Those riders are closer now. He is right. The scattered groups on the ridge have moved down into open ground, no longer forming clean lines. They travel in uneven clusters, sometimes stopping for no obvious reason, then resuming movement, as if following delayed instructions. Amos Crowley studies them carefully. They are no longer a single system, he says quietly. Walter exhales. So that's good, right? Amos shakes his head. No, it means they are multiplying decision centers. Frank frowns. That sounds worse. It is, Amos replies. You stand on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, watching the town attempt to continue its daily functions with increasing irregularity. The coordinator remains inside, visible through the open doorway. He has not moved in some time. That alone feels significant. Walter gestures toward a wagon that has stopped in the middle of the street. That wagon has been there for a full minute doing nothing, Cole nods. It's like it forgot its assignment, Frank mutters. I didn't know wagons had assignments. Amos answers without looking away from the distant riders. Everything in a structured system has an assigned function. Walter sighs. I miss when things just did things. The town shifts again. A group of men walking toward the saloon suddenly break formation, each choosing slightly different paths. None collide, but none remain aligned either. The subtle rhythm of the town is dissolving into something looser, less predictable. Not chaos, but drift. Frank turns toward you. This is your fault, he says. There is no accusation in his tone, just observation. You look at him. Probably. Cole looks uncomfortable. That's not helpful. Amos speaks quietly. It is accurate. Walter groans. I hate accurate conversations. A faint metallic sound echoes from somewhere down the street. Not gunfire, not machinery. Something recalibrating. Everyone turns. The coordinator steps out of the sheriff's office again. This time he looks slightly different. Not physically, behaviorally, more direct. System instability continues, he says. Walter immediately responds. We noticed. The coordinator looks toward the horizon, where the fragmented rider groups are now clearly visible in multiple uneven clusters. External units are no longer synchronized, he says. Frank narrows his eyes. So what does that mean for us? The coordinator pauses, then answers. Containment authority is no longer centralized. A long silence follows. Amos exhales slowly. So there is no single command layer anymore. The coordinator nods. Correct. Walter leans toward Frank. I think we made everything worse in a more complicated way. Frank replies. That seems consistent. Cole points toward the riders again. They're splitting further. He is right. The distant groups are now dividing even more, forming smaller and smaller clusters, each behaving slightly differently, each adjusting to local conditions rather than unified instruction. Amos watches carefully. This is recursive decentralization, he says. Walter frowns. That sounds like something that should come with a warning label. Amos nods. It usually does. The coordinator steps down onto the boardwalk. For the first time, he is closer to you than before. You remain a persistent anomaly node, he says. Frank steps slightly forward. We heard that part already. The coordinator continues. Correction protocols are now being evaluated at multiple independent nodes. Walter groans. So now we've got multiple people deciding whether or not to deal with us. Amos nods. Yes. Cole looks uneasy. That sounds like a lot of attention. Frank mutters. I hate attention. You look across the town again. It is visibly different now. Less controlled. Less unified. Still functioning, but in fragments rather than flow. And somewhere deep in the structure of it all, something is still trying to decide whether to reassert order or abandon it entirely. Amos speaks quietly. This is the unstable middle state. Walter looks at him. Between what and what? Amos answers. Between system collapse and system reformation. Frank exhales. So we're stuck in the middle of it. Amos nods. Yes. A distant shout echoes from the far end of town. Then another. Not panic, not coordination, something in between. Cole watches carefully. They're arguing over directions, he says. Walter sighs. I knew it. Reality is arguing with itself now. Frank looks at you. What do we do if this keeps spreading? Amos answers. Before you can. We either stabilize it. Walter immediately responds. No. Amos continues. Or we let it resolve into natural equilibrium. Frank frowns. And what does that look like? Amos pauses. I do not know. Silence falls again. The wind moves through town once more, and this time nothing aligns behind it. Not immediately, not fully, just enough to remind you that nothing here is finished. The town does not collapse. It does not stabilize either. It simply continues in a state that feels like hesitation stretched too far. Walter stands near the boardwalk railing, watching a wagon attempt to turn down Main Street and then change its mind halfway through the maneuver. I've seen people freeze during gunfights, he says quietly, but I've never seen a town freeze during thought. Frank Dalton keeps scanning rooftops. It's not frozen, he replies. It's branching. Cole frowns. That sounds like something that should stay in trees, not people. Amos Crowley watches the horizon where fragmented rider groups continue splitting into smaller clusters. Decision propagation without hierarchy, he says. Walter exhales sharply. I'm going to start charging per explanation. The coordinator stands just inside the sheriff's office doorway, observing everything without interruption. He speaks after a moment. Behavioral drift increasing. Frank turns slightly toward him. You going to do something about it? The coordinator answers calmly. There is no single corrective action available. Walter groans. So we've moved from control to commentary. Amos steps closer to you. They are no longer enforcing structure, he says quietly. They are monitoring outcomes. Frank narrows his eyes. So nobody is in charge anymore. The coordinator corrects him. Multiple nodes are in charge locally. Cole shakes his head. That sounds like nobody in charge with extra steps. Walter nods. Yes, that one. You step off the boardwalk into the street again. Dust shifts beneath your boots in uneven patterns. A man walking past you suddenly pauses, looks left, then right, then continues in a different direction entirely. No collision, no panic, just scent divergence. The town is learning how to disagree with itself. Frank follows you. This is spreading, he says. Amos nods once. Yes. Cole looks uneasy. To other towns. Amos does not hesitate. Yes. A heavy silence follows. Walter mutters, So we broke the system, and now it's teaching other places how to not agree. Frank exhales slowly. That's not better. Amos replies, No, it is uncontained. The coordinator steps fully outside now, standing beside the group. You remain a persistent influence vector, he says to you. Frank immediately responds, Stop calling him that. The coordinator ignores him. Your presence correlates with increased structural deviation. Walter raises an eyebrow. That sounds like blaming weather on a cowboy. Amos speaks quietly. It is correlation tracking. Cole looks at you. So you're the cause. You don't answer immediately. Because the truth feels less clear every time someone tries to define it. Frank shakes his head. That's too simple. Amos nods. Yes. The coordinator tilts his head slightly. Simplicity is no longer applicable. Walter sighs. I miss when things were applicable. A distant sound echoes through town again. This time it is not mechanical. Not gunfire. Not horses. It is voices. Multiple arguments happening simultaneously at different intersections. Frank looks toward them. They're arguing about direction again. Cole frowns. That didn't happen before. Amos replies, It is happening more frequently. Walter rubs his face. So now even disagreement is spreading. Frank looks at you again. What happens when it hits bigger towns? Amos answers quietly. Instability scales. Silence follows. You look across the town again. The patterns are visibly weaker now. Not gone, but diluted, like instructions fading faster than they can be followed. The coordinator finally speaks again. Independent nodes are requesting escalation protocols. Frank narrows his eyes. Meaning what? The coordinator answers, Containment decisions are being delegated further. Walter groans. So even the people in charge don't want to be in charge. Amos nods. Yes. Cole looks uneasy. That sounds like a chain reaction. Amos corrects him softly. It is. A long pause follows. Then Frank speaks quietly. So what's the end point? No one answers immediately. Because even Amos hesitates. Finally, he says, "There may not be one." Walter stares at him. "That's not comforting," Amos replies. "It is accurate." The wind moves through town again, and this time multiple directions compete within it. Some align, some do not, and the town continues behaving like something learning too many ways to exist at once. The town is no longer behaving like a single place. It is behaving like several versions of itself stacked on top of each other, each one trying to occupy the same streets at the same time. Walter stands very still now, as if movement itself might trigger another disagreement in reality. "I think the town is arguing," he says quietly. Frank Dalton watches a wagon hesitate at an intersection, turn left, then right, then stop completely as if embarrassed by indecision. "It's worse than arguing," Frank replies. "It's negotiating with itself." Cole shakes his head. "That's not supposed to happen." Amos Crowley looks exhausted now, but focused. It is what happens when coordination is distributed beyond reconciliation. Walter sighs. "I need a simpler universe." The coordinator stands at the edge of the sheriff's office porch, observing without expression. "Behavioral divergence is increasing," he says. Frank immediately responds, "You've said that like 5 times." The coordinator nods. "Because it is increasing in measurable intervals." Walter mutters, "I hate measurable intervals." You step into the street again. Dust moves in uneven spirals. A man walking toward the saloon suddenly pauses, looks at the building, then turns away as if the saloon itself has changed its purpose mid-thought. Frank notices immediately. Even buildings are losing agreement now. Amos shakes his head. Not losing agreement. Losing shared interpretation. Cole looks confused. "That sounds worse." Amos nods once. "It is." A sudden sound echoes from the far end of town, voices overlapping again. Not panic, not order, something in between. Walter covers his ears slightly. It's like everyone is thinking out loud at once. Frank glances toward the horizon, and it's spreading outward. He is right. Beyond the town limits, distant movement appears again on the ridgelines. Not structured forces anymore, not even fragmented groups. Something looser, people moving in patterns that don't match each other at all. Amos watches carefully. "It is regional propagation now," he says. Walter groans. "So we didn't just break the system, we gave it a virus," Amos replies calmly. "An inaccurate but functional analogy." Frank looks at you. "This is still because of what we did in the valley." Amos does not deny it. "Yes," Cole swallows. "So we started this." Amos answers. "We accelerated it." Silence follows. The coordinator finally steps off the porch. He walks closer to the group. "You remain the highest variance source," he says to you. Frank immediately responds, "Stop saying it like that." The coordinator continues. "Your presence increases system unpredictability across nodes." Walter points at him. That is not a normal sentence. Amos steps slightly forward. "And what are the nodes doing now?" The coordinator pauses, then answers, "Self-stabilizing independently." Frank frowns. "So each town is doing its own version of this." The coordinator nods. "Yes." Walter exhales slowly. "So we didn't break the system." He looks around. "We just made a lot of smaller systems that don't agree with each other." Amos nods. "Yes," Cole mutters. "That sounds like chaos with paperwork." Frank looks uneasy now. "And if they start interacting?" Amos answers quietly. "They already are." A long silence follows. Then you notice it too. Distant signals. Riders on the horizon. Not organized. Not unified. But moving. And occasionally stopping, as if each group is negotiating with invisible instructions no one else can hear. Walter watches them. I don't like that they all look like they're thinking separately. Frank tightens his jaw. They are. Amos speaks softly. This is distributed instability. The coordinator adds, system evolution is continuing. Walter groans. I miss when evolution meant fish growing legs, not towns forgetting how to agree on directions. You look across the town again. Everything is still functioning, but nothing is synchronized. A wagon turns too late. A man waves at someone who is not acknowledging him. A group gathers at the saloon but splits before entering. Frank finally speaks. So what's the end state of this? Amos hesitates, then answers honestly, unknown. Walter shakes his head. That's the worst answer so far. Amos adds quietly, it may not converge again. Silence spreads. The wind moves through town once more, and this time it carries no agreement with itself. Only variation, endless, expanding variation. The word unknown settles over the town like a dust storm that refuses to pass. Nothing dramatic happens immediately. No collapse, no explosion, no final confrontation. Just a gradual widening of uncertainty across every movement, every decision, every shared assumption that once made the town feel like a single place. Walter stands near the boardwalk, staring at a man outside the general store who pauses mid-step, turns, then continues walking in a completely different direction than he originally intended. I think the town forgot what it was agreeing on, Walter says quietly. Frank Dalton keeps his attention on the horizon. It didn't forget, he replies. It stopped sharing. Cole looks uneasy. That sounds like the same thing. Amos Crowley shakes his head. It is not. The coordinator stands nearby, watching without interruption. System coherence continues to degrade, he says calmly. Walter immediately responds, I'm going to start rating your sentences on how terrifying they are. The coordinator does not react. You step off the boardwalk again, moving slowly through the street. The effect is clearer now. A wagon turns into Main Street, stops, turns again, then continues, as if each change in direction is being evaluated separately. A group of townsmen standing outside the saloon begins speaking, but the conversation splits into multiple overlapping threads that diverge before conclusion. Frank mutters, This isn't chaos yet. Amos replies, No, it is pre-chaos. Walter groans. That sounds like chaos with ambition. Cole looks toward the ridges beyond town. There are riders out there again. He is right, but they are no longer forming clusters. They are moving independently, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs, never maintaining consistent alignment with anything around them. Frank narrows his eyes. They're not following each other anymore. Amos nods. No shared hierarchy remains. Walter exhales. So now everything is improvising? Amos corrects him softly. Everything is selecting locally optimal behavior without global reference. Walter stares. That is the same sentence but more expensive. The coordinator finally steps forward. Local stabilization nodes are requesting clarification protocols. Frank turns sharply. Translation. The coordinator replies, They are asking what to stabilize toward. Silence follows. That question lands heavier than anything before it. Walter shakes his head. That's a question you don't want a town asking itself. Amos looks across the street because there is no longer a single answer. Cole speaks quietly, so every place decides differently now. Amos nods. Yes. Frank exhales slowly. And we started this. Amos does not deny it. Yes. A long pause follows. Then Walter speaks again. I feel like we broke a mirror, and now every piece thinks it's a different reflection. No one corrects him this time, because it is close enough. The coordinator observes quietly. Distributed instability has reached equilibrium threshold, he says. Frank frowns. That doesn't sound like equilibrium. It is a dynamic one, the coordinator replies. Walter sighs. I don't like dynamic anything. You look around the town again. It is still functioning, but now every function is slightly misaligned from the others. A man waves at someone who does not acknowledge him. A wagon pauses where it should not. A conversation splits mid-sentence into two unrelated conversations that both continue as if correct. Frank looks at you. So what happens when this spreads too far? Amos answers quietly. Then there is no longer a frontier. Walter blinks. What is there instead? Amos pauses. Many frontiers. Silence follows. The wind moves through the street again, and for the first time, it feels like it is moving in multiple directions that do not reconcile. Frank finally speaks. So we didn't fix anything, Amos replies. No. Cole looks down. We changed everything. Amos nods once. Yes. The coordinator adds quietly. System transition is ongoing. Walter groans. I miss when endings existed. Amos looks at you. This is no longer a story with an end point, he says softly. Frank exhales. Then what is it? Amos answers after a pause. A condition. The town continues to shift around you. Not collapsing, not stabilizing, just continuing differently in every direction at once. And somewhere far beyond the ridgelines, the prairie itself seems to be learning how to disagree with itself as well. The town no longer feels like a place you arrived at. It feels like a process you are still inside. Walter stands in the middle of Main Street, turning slowly, as if trying to find the version of the town that still remembers how to agree with itself. I think I understand what's happening, he says quietly. Frank Dalton replies without looking at him. I don't think anyone understands it anymore. Cole looks toward the horizon. There are more riders again. He is right. But again no longer means repetition. It means variation returning in new forms, slightly different each time, never fully aligned with what came before. Amos Crowley watches them carefully. They are not converging, he says. Walter exhales. Is that good? Amos shakes his head. No. The coordinator stands near the sheriff's office, observing everything without urgency. System state has stabilized into distributed inconsistency, he says. Walter groans softly. That sounds like a polite way of saying everything is broken differently now. The coordinator does not correct him, because he is not wrong. You step forward into the street one final time. Dust moves in soft, uneven patterns beneath your boots. A wagon passes you, pauses, then continues, as if it has reconsidered its own path halfway through execution. Two men speak near the saloon, but their conversation splits into separate threads that never realign. Frank looks around slowly. So this is it? Amos replies. This is what remains after coordination dissolves. Walter shakes his head. I miss when things were just dangerous. This is philosophical danger. Cole looks uneasy. So what do we do now? No one answers immediately, because the answer is no longer procedural. It is structural. Amos finally speaks. You do not fix this, he says quietly. Walter frowns. Then what do you do? Amos looks at you. You learn how to exist inside it. Frank exhales slowly. That sounds like giving up. Amos shakes his head. It is adaptation. A long silence follows. The town continues moving around you in imperfect patterns. Not collapsing, not resolving, just continuing in multiple directions at once. The coordinator speaks one final time. Distributed systems will continue to evolve independently, he says. Walter mutters. So the frontier is now everywhere. Amos nods. Yes. Frank looks at you. So what are you now? You pause, looking at the badge on your chest. Still there. Still meaningless in the old way. But still present, you answer quietly. Still the sheriff. A pause. Then you add, just not of anything that agrees on what that means anymore. The wind moves through the town again, and this time it does not try to correct itself. It simply continues, endlessly, differently. Good night, my friend.